Hey everyone, your host Caleb Masters here. I'm just dropping in to give you a quick disclaimer that there are some spoilers for Ari Aster's first two films, that is 2018's Hereditary and 2019's Midsommar, that do come up during the spoiler-free review of Beau Is Afraid. So if you have not watched either of those movies or you're worried about spoilers, maybe just come back after you've watched those films. Otherwise, enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we're all in the missing keys-induced anxious panic together. If you're not there yet, don't worry. By the time you get to the end of the review, you will be. Because, ladies and gentlemen, that is right. We are reviewing Ari Aster's new film, Beau Is Afraid. We're going to start with an icebreaker question, as we always do, before jumping into a spoiler-free review, where we'll also provide a verdict on the film, and then we'll conclude the conversation with an in-depth spoiler discussion. And what I'll say is we'll probably spend the majority of the time in the spoiler discussion, because there's just so much to unpack in this movie. Joining me today, as always, he's my co-host and an award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, LaRon Chapman. LaRon, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic. Are you afraid?
I am always afraid. I live in fear, a state of fear. But I'm happy to be here.
The roof might cave in during this podcast.
Oh, yeah, I've already imagined every scenario of the four of you mugging me before I go to my car. Yeah, so it's all there.
Okay.
This is just normal for me. This movie was a comedy for me.
I'm sorry about the naked dude out front with the knife.
That was fine. I was fine with that. That was fine.
He's been there for a few days.
It wasn't that.
Also, very excited to welcome back a special guest. He's an Oklahoma City Council person, recently reelected. Congratulations. An OCU English and Modern Languages artist in residence and film professor, James Cooper. Welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic, sir.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here.
Are you afraid?
Oh, I just have anxiety and depression, just generally. So that's afraid adjacent.
Very, very relevant to this film. And last, but certainly not least, I'm super excited to be rejoined by the Cinematropolis contributor, Daniel Beaukemper. Daniel, welcome back.
Yeah, Caleb, thank you. I'm afraid of a lot of things, but this conversation is not one of them right now.
Just you wait. Just you wait.
Exactly. You haven't
Ron
seen
has me very, very scared of the posters behind us.
You haven't seen the runtime of this yet, Daniel. Before we get into today's review of this divisive film, I want to note that if you're listening to the show and you enjoy the conversation, please make sure to support us by subscribing and leaving us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast app. That goes doubly for those of you who listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't done it, maybe you should be afraid. There's a lot of bad things that could happen if you don't. That's not a threat. I'm just saying, you know, what goes around comes around, and I make sure to rate and review all my podcasts because I'm just afraid an anvil's going to fall on my head. All right, so we're going to start things off with an icebreaker question. So Beau Is Afraid is set in a heightened reality that may or may not be, as it appears, somewhat ambiguous. So I thought we might kick things off by talking about our favorite what is reality movie, where the movie you're watching, you're not sure if it's partially real, not real at all, or completely played straight. Daniel Beaukemper, I'll start with you.
So this is kind of hard because you've got your bigger films, you know, your Matrixes and your Truman Shows and your 12 Monkeys, but then you have like some more quaint films like Shane Carruth's Upstream Color is one I end up thinking a lot about, even though I don't know overall if I like truly like the film, but I do think about it pretty often. But I think the ones that I would cite are two, both from Charlie Kaufman. I think Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, as well as the more recent, I'm thinking of Ending Things. Just two very interesting films that definitely pull apart reality, both for to different ends, but definitely a great double feature if you just want to not feel great about life and love.
I think they're great movies to watch if you were in some sort of fever dream, perhaps.
True.
It's a great time to watch those movies. So if you catch COVID, you just turn on the Charlie Kaufman.
This movie might put you there. Beau Is Afraid might prime you for it. I don't know.
LaRon Chapman, what is your favorite What is Reality movie?
I also put Charlie Kaufman's two films here. Eternal Sunshine comes to mind the most when I was watching this. But I think some more traditional ideas of like just dealing with perception, what's real, what's not. The Father and Jacob's Ladder are two movies that also came to mind, where we're in the headspace of the characters, dealing with a traumatic experience, and everything we're viewing, we don't know until we know that what we've been viewing is not what is happening. So I think those are two, again, more palatable examples of what things of this film is kind of exploring. But in these cases, dealing with PTSD, dealing with dementia, all different alters of the mind. So, yeah.
Great recommendations. I like that we've got an older one and a more recent film. James Cooper, what is your selection?
Those are really good choices. Just want to affirm you all in those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
American Psycho.
Oh,
that's a great one.
It came immediately to mind. And then I was like, no, I'll make a list. And I was like, no, it came to mind first. I think it's wonderful. I still think my other choice would be Mulholland Drive.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting you all chose movies, a couple at least, from like Eternal Sunshine from around that era. I don't know what that means for that moment in time. And I keep seeing lists, I'm sure you all do too, where like Mulholland Drive is like one of the best films noted of all time, like up number one sometimes. Did Sight and Sound say that? Someone said that recently. I can't remember who it was.
It's consistently in the conversation for one of the greatest films ever made.
Yeah. I just think those movies are wonderful. I think it's interesting. They're both in some ways like Wall Street and then Hollywood. So like these constructings of like either wealth or storytelling like movies, So
Yeah. Mulholland Drive is an excellent choice.
I watched that with my mother.
How'd that go?
Well, she doesn't go to movies with me anymore. But
Okay.
LaRon, are you afraid? Was a preview for Beau Is Afraid?
right.
my mom loves Mulholland Drive. She has a title for these sorts of movies. She calls them movies you can't do laundry to.
I like that.
That's a very mom answer.
And that is interesting because that's exactly the opposite of what my mom likes. She wants movies that she can go to the bathroom and come back and still know what the hell happened without. And I'm like, so you don't want to watch movies.
That is her preference.
Yes.
But because she and I lived together when I was 18, 19, 21, and I was working at Blockbuster, she was in film school.
There was no chance.
She was
done a download on.
Now she doesn't mind these. It's just,
Yeah.
She loves Twin Peaks: The Return. We watched all 3 seasons together.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
It's David Lynch. Surely he's done something that's oh God, I don't like that movie. What is the movie with Laura Dern?
Eraserhead. Oh, no.
The one.
Inland Empire?
Yeah.
He discovered digital film and
That's one of these heightened reality things.
Man, speaking of which, have you seen that he's been on a war? I mean, he continues to be on a warpath about just insulting people who watch movies on their phone. It's great.
Lynch is?
Yeah.
Still?
He's been doing it off and on for years, but and maybe this is just a slow news day on the internet, but just this morning I saw a fresh story talking about how he was chastising people who watched a movie on their phone. He's like, you didn't watch the movie. It's not designed for your phone. What are you doing with your time? Go watch it on the big screen. Yeah, it was just bizarre. He does this I feel like this comes out every year, 2 years, something.
Yeah.
I agree with him, but if I'm someplace and that's what I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to do.
yeah, and it's accessibility. He very much vehemently denies that you are even experiencing the film. And I would take umbrage with that. I know it's not the optimal setting, but you can still,
So would you say if you watch Dunkirk on a Nintendo 3DS,
yes, a little to some extent.
Yeah.
It's not black and white.
I love how creative people on the internet have gotten at figuring out how to port movies into devices they're definitely not designed to be watched
Game
on.
Boy Advance cartridges, yes.
Yeah. So you guys both mentioned Charlie Kaufman. So I'm going to just give a quick shout to one I like that you haven't already mentioned, which is Anomalisa. I love it. I'm always going to champion stop motion. And I think that one is particularly interesting because you kind of get inside the head of how this powerful the seemingly powerful, rich, successful person views other people, which is they're all kind of the same. He doesn't really care about them. And frequently throughout the movie, you're not sure who he's talking to actually and what these relationships mean to him. So that one, I think the reality is a little more established, but the big kind of caveat is every other character who's not him is the same character.
Voiced by the same person.
Yeah. So quick shout out to that one. I also have to give a shout out to Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Love Brazil. Talking about in the capitalist machine, what is reality? What is our purpose? Can we ever escape the reality that has been built for us? I guess there's several different cuts, but I think the actual director's cut you can get on Criterion.
Yes,
is definitely the way to go. It really makes a world of difference with that film.
Hey, watch this. My dear friend Randy, when he went on his little Beau Is Afraid Instagram story, review today, he mentioned Brazil.
Oh, nice.
So, great minds or something.
Great minds.
Yeah.
It's a great film that
Depending on who Randy is, but yes.
He's a smart guy.
He does the music, the metal music, that chat pile stuff.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And he was thinking about Brazil. Yeah. I just think Brazil is just generally, this is going to make me sound like an old man. I'm really not. But I don't think people talk about Brazil enough, just in general.
No,
it's kind of like one of those movies that has been lost in the sands of time just because it's hard to get the actual cut of the film.
Yeah.
And I think it's studied.
School, no.
Yeah.
Speaking of Betty Robbins, post-film school, she loves our film professor. Sorry, I say names like people know. everyone here listening knows who Betty Robbins is.
Betty.
Randy, Betty. We're all friends here.
Dinner parties.
Yes. Film professor at OU. Yeah, that was one of the required screenings. And so that's definitely a film we had to download on quite a bit. So, but post-film school, I don't hear many people speak about that.
I don't even see it cited in essays or think pieces. Yeah. Last one I give a shout out to. This one's seen a little bit of a resurgence in appreciation, or at least it did about 10 years ago, and that is Alex Proyas's Dark City. Oh, yeah. Love it because it's you're meshing together so many different genres, and the character himself does not, for a good chunk of the film, does not understand what reality is, and before you figure out what it is, it's pretty wild. You're like, is this dream reality? Is this the rules of the world he's living in? This is clearly not our reality. It's like a heightened noir reality. I have a lot of fun with that one.
Jennifer Connelly, that era 90s.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rufus Sewell.
I've actually only seen it one time, so I don't.
And which cut did you see?
That I don't know. Probably just a very basic DVD cut.
I can lend you the
I will
copy
watch
to
it.
see.
I will
Yeah.
You should have seen your reaction to Laurent right then. You were just like, oh my God, I have strong thoughts.
Laurent and I frequently are almost lock sync, and it's kind of scary. He recommends a lot of movies I haven't seen, but it's only a handful of times I'll stumble upon one
that I haven't.
that he hasn't seen. And you have seen it. It's just
I've seen it, but it's definitely not. Yeah,
it's
the forefront of my mind.
It's a noir. I just think it's a really brilliant, kind of combination of the sci-fi, the noir, and again, it's still sort of interrogating the levels of power and the hierarchy of power and the influences they have or the control they have over our lives. Can we possibly break free from them? That's one of the things I love about these what is reality movies. It's people coming to terms with the world they live in, and each movie is sort of in its own way exploring, is it possible for these people to find a way out?
Yeah.
And that leads us to our review of Beau Is Afraid.
I am so sorry for what your daddy passed down to you. But I wanted a child, the greatest gift of my life.
I'm visiting my mother tomorrow.
Hi, Carrot. It's Mom. I'm just calling to say that I'm so excited to see you tomorrow. You're my angel, and I love you. Okay, I love you. Okay, bye, sweetie. I love you.
Are you at the airport?
I'm on my way. It's not safe, is it? What do you think I should do?
I'm sure you'll do the right thing, sweetheart.
So according to IMDb, Beau Is Afraid is described as following the sudden death of his mother, a mild-mannered but anxiety-ridden man confronts his darkest fears as he embarks on an epic. So a couple of fun facts about this film I want to mention. Firstly, for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with Ari Aster, this is his third feature film following 2018's Hereditary and 2019's Midsommar. This guy is cranking them out, and he's going into production on his next one this summer. Originally, the film was titled Disappointment Boulevard, and related, Aster, before they renamed the film, had previously described it as a Jewish Lord of the Rings. And budgeted at $35 million, this is A24's most expensive film to date. I think that's a testament to just how much money Ari Aster has made the studio. So, Beau Is Afraid, really unique film. Lots to dig into here, but I just want to do quick overall thoughts on the film, starting with LaRon Chapman.
Yeah, so I think I am a fan of, I don't know if it's Ari Aster, but I'm a fan of his work because he has vision, and whether I love every detail of every aspect of every movie he makes, there's always something interesting happening. And he's taking risks. He's doing things that, that traditional horror movies, he's taking, kind of recontextualizing, things. And it's always rooted in some kind of human element. Hereditary worked so well for me because it was rooted in trauma. It was rooted in the fact that this is something that's repeating with all of the different people in this family. They're all dealing with it in different ways. And, instead of it just being a ghostly figure about possession, that we've seen that movie, it feels more tangible or tactile. And then Midsommar, dealing with a horrible breakup, who hasn't had one of those? I didn't go to a Swedish cult, to, get over it. But I wish I had. Maybe I'd come out of it better. But
are you really over it, Laurent?
I'm not over it. I'm not over it.
I noticed that guy you vacationed with last year.
I didn't need to burn him alive. So, but no, I appreciate that. What we see as horror is being somewhat redefined here. That he's giving us different avenues. Because I wouldn't even say Beau Is Afraid is a horror film. There's horrific elements to it. There's tension. It's definitely anxiety inducing, but it just depends on what you define as horror. So this is a film that I can't really give a perfect a score yet because I don't think I truly know how I feel about it yet. It's something that I think I will know in 5 years upon a couple more viewings where I stand with it. But it's definitely something that held my attention and made me think. And so that's more than I can say about a lot of movies that I go to see.
It's really interesting you brought up the question of, is it a horror movie? It reminds me, I know when Hereditary came out, there was actually quite a bit of discussion in the horror community about whether Hereditary was a horror movie, which was kind of bizarre to me because I thought the film was terrifying.
Yeah, I was genuinely scared by it. So.
Yeah. I still left an impression. And I think that's a valid question going into Beau Is Afraid because I think the expectation from us as viewers who have seen his previous films
is that he's going to make horror movies. This will be another horror movie. And it is and it isn't.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. James Cooper, what are your overall thoughts on Beau Is Afraid?
I'm literally looking up Mulholland Drive right now because I just interesting. I was looking at the time, like how long that movie is, because it's one of the. I'm kind of with Laurent. I don't know where I'm landing quite yet with this film, but I can for sure say I think it's too long. Like that, I haven't got to talk to him about it, but I ran it. So two of my friends, we have a horror movie night on Mondays, and so rather than doing that last night, we went to go see this movie, right? And because I had to be here for this podcast. Yeah, I was like, I gotta see this movie. And then, we have city council on Tuesday and then all the after council meetings. There's no way I'm going to be able to watch a 3-hour movie before that podcast. So we got to do it Monday night. So I go and then I run into some friends there, including this Randy fella. And who I was like, oh my God, this is great. We get to watch this together. So imagine my surprise. We leave this movie when it's all said and done, and Randy, or one of them, I don't remember whose, it was 10:30, maybe 11. And one of them was just like, it just breezed right by. I didn't feel a bit of that. I'm like, what? Say what you will about this movie, but what do you mean 3 hours went by?
Breezed right by. What?
So maybe breeze isn't the right word, but I mean that he didn't feel it. I just felt it, like,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to look up Mulholland Drive, which is 2 hours and 27 minutes, and I do not. I even feel like that movie's maybe a little too long. I can feel a moment where it's like, oh shit, okay. But I also just love that movie. The movie is literally one of my favorite movies of all time. I just think it's incredible. And I'm not the first person to say it, so it's not like an original thought. So I don't know. I think that's a problem with this film. Like, and as someone who loves the what do you call it, New Hollywood, I'm very like aware of the excesses of the end of that decade, right? Like, and the fact that it's male directors who straight, generally white, who are like, I'm gonna make a 5-hour apocalypse now. Like, we're going over budget. But really, it's a metaphor, you see, for like, madness and the human heart, or whatever it is. That's what my Heart of Darkness, adaptation is. So, or whatever the movie is of that time. I got those vibes watching this. Like, it just, in some ways, it just kind of felt a little bloated. As this guy is using all of this different imagery metaphorically to explore his own real life. Like, I believe I saw like snippets of an interview where he's like, I did this because I had to work out some mom stuff, it's a convert. And I was like, really?
I didn't get that.
This movie? Oh, right. What?
Where?
Prove it, and I had seen that before. I haven't read anything about this movie really except that snippet. And I saw that like a couple weeks ago. I have read nothing since. I've seen it yesterday. I haven't time because I went to bed pretty late.
The movie?
Did all this work today. And so this is the first time I got to think about this movie. So I don't know. I just, that's kind of the thing that worries me. And maybe I feel like it's a little misogynistic. I haven't decided where I land on that yet. Like, all the women in the movie doesn't seem good. Doesn't seem good. But I laughed a lot. Did y'all not laugh a lot?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Some of it was uncomfortable
All the time.
after, but
Yeah.
definitely laughed, yeah.
A lot. Like, it's funny.
It's a funny movie. It's a dark comedy, among many other things.
I was listening to PBS NewsHour on the drive to the theater, because that's who I am. And it was a segment on the Tucker Carlson, he's out, sort of thing. And they were just talking about like the Republican Party as this sort of the base of the party giving way to a Tucker. Like, they want to hear that sort of figure, and he's feeding it in this way. Did y'all not get those vibes early in the film when Beau is in the city? Just his fears of like, oh my God, these homeless people are
right.
You know what I mean? Like, and oh my God, look at the punks. They have the tattoos.
I definitely got the vibe that a less savvy viewer could very easily mistake this for like the fears that, people have these fears. They come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And some people do genuinely believe that this is like what cities are like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such a hilarious way to critique that mindset. Like that, like truly brilliant way to critique that mindset. It's like, this is what you know what I mean? Like, to be like, this is what you sound like. You sound like this.
Like, this is what's going on out there. Yeah.
Like the exact.
Right.
And maybe Beau watched a lot of Fox News.
Well,
possibly.
I don't know Beau's politics. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
It's better we don't know.
Yeah.
The little we see of his like media consumption, it's from what I remember, I feel like there's one other television scene, but it's cut short. But like his media consumption, it's fear. It's just like, turn it on. Here's a bunch of things to be afraid. Which I mean,
true.
You know,
Right.
checks out being Fox. But
and he like I didn't even catch that, but okay, good.
Fear-mongering,
I almost forgot about that in the movie. So today I had a conversation with someone who will remain nameless because I don't want to like put them on blast for their politics or whatever. But he said to me, he was trying to figure out like how someone could fall for like a Tucker Carlson, right? Like how does that happen? And we were like, yeah, that's a good question. And his response then was like, it's like a cult, right? Like, so then the question is, how does someone who's smart fall for like a Haley's Comet or a Waco or a conspiracy theory in that way? And I think the fact that so much of the politics are removed from the internals of this film, and it gives us this very exploration of his internal world, his upbringing, that like why Beau is afraid. Like maybe this exploration helps us understand how someone's upbringing and the way guilt and shame work can actually prepare someone for a Tucker Carlson message. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, Beau throughout the movie is begging to have someone tell him what to do.
Yeah.
Like the whole movie. He's like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. Like he's not been equipped with the tools he needs to be self-sufficient, to take care of himself. And the way he's survived is just by having other people tell him this is what you're going to do. And he just does it. Right. So, I mean, I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
When there's this void of like, I'm not equipped to handle all of the scary things happening in the real world, or the intimidating things happening in the real world. So someone could show up and just tell them, here's the answer. Right. Makes it easier to cope. I would suspect.
I think that'd be my concluding like opening review part here would be to say that like, I do think that this sort of conversation is why I can understand someone would throw the word masterpiece at this film, especially if you're like a Charlie Kaufman, fan or whatever. I see how they get there. I guess my worry is that a lot of the root of that in this film seems to center around the mother figure. Although I am hyper aware that when he finally... Your father, he's in the attic. He's a dick. And you know what I mean? Like, that's it. Like, your dad was an asshole. But that's such a small thing. Like, the movie does not linger and put the roots at the father's feet. The mother is...
The bearer of the burden of all of everything that went wrong with him. And there could be an underlying misogynistic text to that. I can see it.
Yeah,
but I also know some terrible moms.
Yes,
it's tricky though. It's a tightrope it has to walk because you have to remember we're also just seeing things from Beau's perspective, and there might be a hint of misogyny in him, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
He definitely resents his mother, and that could very easily translate to misogyny. Right. So, but that's the thing, though, is the movie is it accidentally misogynist?
Is it critiquing that or is it exploring that?
Right.
It's hard to say. I don't want to wade into spoilers too much. So
Yeah.
But there
I've
is
already spoilered us. Sorry. Yeah, here we are.
Well, Daniel, how about this? Instead of spoiling us, how about you just tell us what you thought of the film?
Yeah, sure. It's great. I'm trying to like anticipate because I know my reaction to like Midsommar. And Midsommar is a film I now very much love, but did not after my initial viewing. And I suspect something similar might happen with this film. So I'm kind of trying to anticipate, but immediate reaction, I believe I do like it. Hereditary was more of an immediate reaction. I liked it. And here with Beau, it's like, I think I like it, but I have a hard time recommending it fully. Part of it is, well, it's sense of humor. It's like if I know someone, I keep mentioning, John Waters in reference to this film and like Desperate Living. But I think if you have fun with those movies, you'll have specifically the...
It's not shame-based, though, right? I mean, are you thinking, like, because you find it funny, are you afraid if you recommend it? Like when I recommended Happiness to my neighbor and they never spoke to me again, Todd Solondz's film. I thought it was hilarious, but they did not. And
I wonder to some extent, or if it would just make somebody who I could see, if you were particularly anxious
Yeah.
I don't know if this film would be cathartic for you.
Yeah,
Maybe I think that's what I'm getting through, and I want to be kind of like mindful of that. But like at the same time, I think what's also telling, and to build on James' point earlier about it feeling just a little bit too long, is like our audience was very reactive, and there was a lot of laughter, including myself, for probably the first 2.5 hours, and then finally where we get to the thing that we've alluded to that I think would get the like strongest reaction really throughout the whole film, it was silent. There was maybe a few sighs or some grunts, and I think that's pretty telling that yes, the film maybe just went a little bit too long. Whereas like Midsommar, rewatching it again, that is a long film as well, comparably long, I think.
Especially if you watch the director's cut.
Exactly, but the theatrical is still, I think, about 2.5 hours long. And that film, I feel like earns its length. Yeah, it very much does it. And I can't say quite the same with Beau, but then again, maybe it's because it's the viewing experience. Maybe it's going to change. I think each of his films have offered, each time I've rewatched them, it's a different experience that this one could potentially appreciate. But it does hit you with something that it feels like it is trying to emotionally exhaust you. But I wonder if that's a place we always want to be. And part of me thinks like that's good and that's rewarding, but then there's it. I also wonder, what does that make the experience? Like, does that make the experience worth it ultimately? Does that, make it worthwhile? But I will say, I don't think I'm going to forget this film. And I think that's what's very telling, is that there are distinct images in this one, including, and as well as the previous Aster works, that just stick out. And if anything, even if it's hard to recommend wholeheartedly, it's still very telling, I think, in a bit of its, I don't know. I want to say timelessness, but it's not like other films don't operate in the same level. But I think there is something somewhat unique. I don't know if it's all particularly productive. And I will say, mention on the note of the women and their portrayal in the film, there's really only one that has like a somewhat positive portrayal. There's really only one character, and I'll get to her a little bit later, but even she's kind of not particularly present. It's only momentary. And so I do kind of wonder about that and what Aster is trying to say, or if he's just simply trying to critique, Laurent, what you were getting at, misogyny, but it's to what extent can you critique misogyny that you become misogynistic in your film. But I don't know. I don't know if that stuck with me truly, but I do think I like it. I think if you already know Aster, it's probably, you're going to want to see this film and you may receive it well. But yeah, and it is interesting. It almost feels like those films, like you see it once and like definitely at least like see it in some capacity, but whether or not it's going to be the film for everyone and whether or not it's going to have that longevity that Hereditary and Midsommar have, I mean, that's to be seen, and it's hard to guess. It's really hard to guess. I want to think so, but I don't know. I don't know if it will or not.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this movie was pretty powerful, provocative cinema. I know it's the joke, but it does reach a point where I'm just so overwhelmed and in awe of all the things happening. And what I mean is, I really went on an emotional journey throughout the film.
Yeah.
I felt like the movie, in a very clever way, as you outlined, depicted how people who live with anxiety every day probably feel. I know I've been there in certain chapters of my life. There's certain people who live this way every day. At the beginning of the movie, it's like everything is scary. Everything that could go wrong will go wrong. And what is it like to be a person living that way? That's compelling to me, because what is the thought process for these people? What is the root of why someone would live that way, as we talked about earlier? I found that exploration really, really fascinating, and I don't think I've seen it explored in this way in a movie. I do really question the runtime, though, because it's one of those, and gosh, I feel like with all these 3-hour movies lately, it's like sometimes the like emotional exhaustion is the point.
Yeah.
But does that make it a better movie, or great, you made a point? And I just don't know where I'm going to land on it. I think this is definitely going to be one of the movies in Aster's filmography that people are going to go back to a lot. I think for a lot of reasons, it's probably going to be studied to a certain degree, just because I think there's so many different layers to it whether it's the dark comedy, whether it's the commentary, whether it's the psychological read, there's or psychosexual read for that matter. Like there's just so many things going on. There's so many different lenses in which you can watch Beau Is Afraid and have different takeaways. So from that perspective, I think it's a really rich film. It has a lot to offer and a lot to potentially say. And because it's not super clear, it leaves it up to us, the viewers, to have interpretations. Yeah. Which is what I love about movies. So it has all of that. I think I said when my initial reaction on Letterboxd was 4.5 stars, probably a masterpiece. Never want to see it again. You know, I think I've cooled a little bit on the latter part, but it's definitely one of those where I don't think I would recommend it lightly, and I don't know that I'll revisit it lightly. I do kind of have that morbid curiosity where I'm like, I think I need to see it a second time through a different lens. Also knowing kind of where the film is going, I think it'll help me contextualize a lot of the things that I kind of threw me for a loop the first time. Is it a great film though? Time will tell. It was an unforgettable experience for me, to be sure. But no way in hell did 3 hours fly by. I remember when the movie was over, Daniel and I were in the same theater. I was like, I feel like we've been here for a week.
Yes.
Holy cow. Like, it was like, how long have we been here? Is it a day, a week, 3 hours? I don't know. So how would we compare this to Aster's other films? I mentioned the point about horror earlier, LaRon, that you hinted at. You know, this film is definitely more of a psychological drama, I guess might be a better way to categorize it. James, how would you compare this to his previous two films?
Ooh, good. Thank you for that question. Because that's the question I'd like to discuss. So it was almost going to be my initial answer to your review question. So I don't know. What's it called? Hereditary. I only really like that film. And I'll never quite know the extent to which The Witch is responsible for that, because I love The Witch. Like, I believe that's the same year. Was it either Moonlight or Call Me By Your Name?
I think it was the same year as Call Me By Your Name, or the very next year, I think, actually.
2018. Yeah.
Call Me By Your Name was 17, I'm pretty sure. The Witch was 2016.
So that's Moonlight.
Yeah.
And the only reason why The Witch is not the best movie of that year, just so we're clear, is Moonlight. Like, The Witch is... I watched it on Christmas with my mother at her choosing, not mine. I'd already seen it in the theaters, but I put on the subtitles. And when we got to the possession scene of the boy, I wept. I imagine, especially if you're watching this on Christmas, which was unintentional, I didn't understand the symbolism as much. But for this boy being like, my love, as if he's talking to Jesus on Jesus' birthday. It's pretty powerful stuff. So then I watched Hereditary, which is, I feel like it's really good, but it's not The Witch. You know, like, The Witch is a shot-for-shot perfect film. I think Hereditary thinks it's a shot-for-shot perfect film. It's grown on me over the years. Toni Collette's performance. I think the ending is spectacular with its violence, with its, I think, kind of, I guess, critique of, like, this desire in society to, like, prop up a patriarch. So much so that we will remove this young man's, like, individuality and autonomy to make him fit this, like, our desire. I think all that's great. And then, of course, the head scene, right? You know, just, my God. I really do not like Midsommar. I had not seen Wicker Man yet, but I knew it. And that Radiohead album had come out with the Burn the Witch. Yeah. So I knew that music video, and I was like, well, it's Wicker Man. And so when I started watching Midsommar, I was like, this better not be Wicker Man. And it's Wicker Man. And it's long. It's long. And I actually just looked it up earlier while you all were talking. It is shorter than this film, and I think feels as long as this film. Especially if you know it's the Wicker Man. You're just waiting. You're like, okay, so we're going to, like, burn this guy alive, right? I think it's beautiful cinematography-wise. I'm just spoiling both of those films. I'm just like, oh, yeah, and the boyfriend, and it's fire, and,
I'll put a disclaimer at the top of the episode.
But I hated that film, legendarily, with my friends, because we all walked out on the Penn Square Mall parking lot, and they're like, you didn't love it? And I'm like, no, what? You all love... I was shocked I thought the audience was with me, but they loved that film. I've had students write multiple times at their choosing about Midsommar. And I just find it pedantic, like, because the students, when they write their, art, analysis of this film, they're talking about the theme trauma, and it's like, fuck, duh, like. You know what I mean? This is not me judging the students. The students are writing very well about this. It's just that Ari Aster has like laid it out so transparently. There is no digging for metaphor in Midsommar. There is in Hereditary. Like Hereditary is like almost Hitchcockian in its shots and the way it's like telling you things about, its themes and story, even the way the images move the story along. But Midsommar is just, oh my God, I hate that film. So it was 1-to-1 for me going into this one. And I think it's better than Midsommar, and I still think Hereditary is better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Hereditary is already nearing like classic status. I mean, I know it's not old enough to be a classic, but I mean, just in terms of it's already stuck around. I mean, we've been talking about that movie since 2018. Still, I feel like people talk about it all the time. And it plays a little more accessibly, I think, because it's a horror versus Midsommar, which is, as you say, basically the Wicker Man.
Which I finally then did watch Wicker Man, the original. I've not seen the Nick Cage one. Yeah. I loved Wicker Man.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And then I got a lighter at HorrorCon here last year. That was the thing they set on fire at the end of the Wicker Man. That's the image on the lighter. I don't think I've ever come across a more clever lighter in my life. That is funny. A lighter that's Wicker Man. You all don't seem as amused by that as I am. But.
Well, it's good to hear. I do think that Midsommar generally is a little more divisive. I hear people talk about Hereditary a lot. I hear people talk about Midsommar too, but not nearly as regularly.
Not with the same reverence. I like both, but I can understand that though. I can see how when you pit those two movies together. I feel like Hereditary is a very but the way you say obvious, I felt like Hereditary was a little bit more obvious about what it's about, and I felt like Midsommar was a little more stretched. I get you did say it was pedantic, and I can see that. Like the theme does become pretty clear at some point, and it's much longer. But Hereditary to me is very clearly like, this is about trauma. This is about how families, do this to each other. So that for me, it hit me over the head a little bit more, but I didn't mind as much because there was enough going on stylistically, and then Toni Collette that drew me into it, where I was able to not be so distracted by the fact that I knew exactly what it was telling me, what it was about, so.
Yeah, I think that's like to some extent there, and I get what you're saying too, James. I think it makes sense because Midsommar is not an ambiguous film. Like it's not even remotely. You're absolutely right. It shows its whole, like the entire story is in the first shot of the film with that like tapestry. It's like, here's everything we're going to go. And I get that, but I think there's like a part of it that's just like,
it's dreamlike for me.
It's like sensory too. It's like that sensation and just like kind of being there. It is like, I guess more of a passive watch. And I will say I even recently critiqued a film for not having like much thematic discipline, or for like giving the audience anything to work with in that, and Knock at the Cabin specifically. And I don't think that film was, and I don't think Shyamalan as a whole cares too much to let the audience pick apart a film and stuff. Ari Aster, I'm not entirely.
I mean, if you're comparing them, I mean, clearly Knock at the Cabin is less subtle than Midsommar, but I mean, it's not a great comparison.
No, but that, like we're speaking to the same thing, and that I'm saying like that's a thing though. But I think I feel like with Midsommar and that I don't feel it like where I was insulted by Knock at the Cabin and how it did it. Midsommar, I was pretty along for the ride, and I felt just with the way it frames specifically Danny, Florence Pugh's character, and I think just her journey. Again, I get that it's not super original, but just the way it was executed, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, that was how I approached that movie as well. I mean, I think I kind of knew what it was before I went and saw it. Even it was kind of the same thing where you're like, I'd read a lot about it going in. I was like, this is kind of like, and I think I also celebrated my birthday and by seeing that movie with a bunch of friends, and that was kind of how I pitched it to the people. I was like,
I was there. I remember.
Yeah,
this.
you were there. I was.
How dare you?
I was literally like, "Hey guys, it's like the Wicker Man." I literally pitched it to them as like, it's gonna be like the Wicker Man, but Ari Aster doing it. You know, because I had some friends who were newer friends, but I basically was trying to pitch like, "Oh, what is it?" And I was like, Wicker Man. You've seen it? Yeah. Okay, it's like that. Did you like it? Yeah, it's cool. And you know that's how it went. So that movie, I felt like I knew exactly what it was going in, and it was more about watching the craft and the execution, Daniel, as you're laying out, and less about trying to interpret or work out the movie. I think the movie's pretty straightforward in what it's about. Now that said, does a movie that's more about execution need to be 2.5 hours long? I especially when it's like using a very familiar premise. I don't think so. But it is impressive filmmaking. The craft is impressive. I love the performances. I love, Florence Pugh. That was kind of one of her breakout hits, right? Will Poulter makes a very small but impressionable douchebag in that movie.
The moment he's on screen.
Yes, every second he's on screen, you're just like, oh my god. This
and
guy.
I've always thought Aster's always had an interesting like relationship with women in general. You know, like because I feel like that movie was a little bit more emboldening to the female character.
It's the whole arc, right?
Yeah, but whereas, like you said, we swing left here to, Beau Is Afraid, and it's interesting because both of those movies anchor around a female performance and a female going through, a horrific experience. And here it's Beau, but his whole trauma is anchored around a woman that we don't see for most of the film. So I do think it's interesting. Well, I'd love to know his relationship with his mom and his real relationship.
That was probably the first question everyone Googled after the movie was over.
Because every one of these movies is dealing with incest in some capacity. Yeah. In Hereditary, the grandmother, again, spoilers, but is like breastfeeding there's a lot of weird stuff happening in that as well. And so, and then Midsommar, like the little hybrid character,
the
Oracle character that's, I'm sure, a product of inbreeding, and then obviously this movie, he'd be an interesting person to unpack, mentally, but I've heard him speak a couple times and he doesn't reveal much. So
it's funny. I still love Hereditary. That's the one I've gone back to a few times. I've watched it with new people. I've watched it just because I'm, thinking about it. I'm like, hey, well, here's a new angle on the movie. Midsommar, I haven't seen it since we saw it in the theater. And, it left an impression in that the experience was very memorable. And there's a lot of imagery that's so powerful. But, it is definitely not one I'm eager to get back to.
Sure. They're all heavy.
That's kind
none of these are light.
Well, that's where I come at. When I think about Beau Is Afraid, I legitimately don't know. Am I going to end up in the Hereditary space where I'm like, every once in a while, I'm like, I should check this out again or show it to someone new? Or am I going to end up in the Midsommar, which is, hey, this is a fun time. I liked it enough that we dressed up for the characters that Halloween.
Yep, you were the bear.
I was the bear. And so I liked it enough. But at the same time, I don't really think there's, because of how obvious all of the ideas are, I don't really feel like there's much of a reason to go back to it. For me personally. No, it doesn't make a bad movie. So related to Joaquin Phoenix's performance, and I want to talk about this in the spoiler-free section as well, just because I think this guy puts himself through the ringer for these roles, and I guess he actually was, as he usually does not appear to be in a good mental state, was also not in a good mental state filming the movie. I guess he at one point passed out on the set, and they used the shot in the movie of him falling through one of the windows. But I guess A24 put out a podcast about this. If you're interested in learning more, A24 is a podcast, and they did a talk with Ari Aster and Joaquin Phoenix, just kind of talking about their relationship on the film and all that. And it was an insightful talk. But Joaquin Phoenix really put himself into a dark place for this movie. I think the performance is impressive and very bleak. But I'll turn to you. I'll start with you, Daniel. What did you think of the performance by Joaquin Phoenix?
I mean, I enjoy almost all of his performances. To a certain extent, I'll mention too, I have this bit of an anchor, even though you see elements of who he is, but I think he does, a lot of his characters that he portrays are not too far off from one another. So I don't know if that, I don't know what that says about his range necessarily, but I do think with The Master and Two Lovers, and You Were Never Really There, I think this film kind of takes it to a different angle. It might be Joker adjacent, but I think that's just because it's the most recent film that's in a lot of people's memories. But I think the Andy Kaufman comparisons that I know a lot of people make, I do not think that's off base with this, especially with the physical. It's I want to say it's physically engaging, but there's so many shots of Beau where he's just either laying down or leaned or perched, and he's just looking in this dejected, defeated stance. But I think the other thing that we're always really sold on, and hence the name, I guess, Beau Is Afraid, I think to some extent to get a character that is riddled with fear and anxiety, I think, there's only so much that the writing can ultimately do. I mean, sticking the landing is on the performer. And I think here I cannot think of somebody who would be better. I mean, I'm sure there is someone, but as far as an A-list or a household name, if you're going to get, an actor for this particular role, I think Joaquin Phoenix makes almost the most sense. And it almost feels bad saying that, especially knowing what he physically went through and emotionally to do that. And then I assume, I can't recall correctly or I can't cite anything, but Joker presumably put him into some, physically exhausting.
I mean, he definitely lost a lot of weight.
A lot of weight. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of Christian Bale with The Machinist a little bit. It's just it's that particular form of, I don't know if method acting is really the right word, or that's what that is, but that particular commitment to the performance. But I do think he's very well in this role. I think of the problems that this film has, I don't think Phoenix himself contributes to any of them. I think he as a character and as a person works really well here. Is it his best performance? No, not for me personally, but it is still a quality Joaquin Phoenix performance, but I can't think of any that are terrible personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's well said. He's definitely high caliber. This is going to sound terrible, but you need an mentally unwell white dude. He's become the guy. I mean, I know that's not all he can do, but you think about, you mentioned that all the movies you mentioned, The Master, you get Joker. I mean, and then this, it's not just he does one every once in a while. It's now this is what he's been doing for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, if maybe he pivots after this, but I don't know. That's not really related to his performance in the film. Laurent, what did you think?
Yeah, I think he's the perfect kind of, I don't want to say blank canvas, because he's not empty. There's a lot wrestling under the surface there, but it's definitely an understated performance for him, I think. And I think that was the right approach, because everything happening around him is so hyperbolic, it just seems ridiculous. And so I think if he even turned it up one more notch, this movie would have imploded. You know what I mean? We needed that calmness, or if you will, by comparison, to kind of
timid. I'd say
timid. Yeah,
he's got that timid nature to him. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I agree. It's also not my favorite performance, but I think it's more hinges on the character, because he's a very frustrating character for me. Frustrating because. We pity him, but it's frustrating for the viewer, because there's so many instances where we just wish he would just say or do something, because, and then and I think that's the point of it. He is so shackled by his own, I want to use the word trauma again, but yes. So it feels very, very much like he's enslaved by his own thoughts, and imprisoned by his own thoughts. And so I think he plays to that very effectively. So,
James, what did you think of Joaquin Phoenix's performance?
It's funny listening to all of you. I guess I didn't a lot. Like that to me, his performance is maybe the least interesting thing in the film. Like there was a moment. Oh, by the way, I hate Joker.
Fair enough.
Just
That's fine.
just terrible film. I literally, when I saw that movie, my good friend Hal, and I've never seen anyone do this literally ever watching a movie, or maybe in response to anything now that I think about it. There was a moment during the end, I think when there's like a big reveal in the Joker at the end, where did the Joker and Bruce's parents...
Okay, yeah. So
like
you discover... So Joker didn't kill Bruce's parents, but the angry mob that the Joker incited killed his parents, and you get that... It was a very fan fiction, like, oh, and this is how that happened.
Pearl snapping.
Even though they promised us that it wasn't going to be it was going to be a standalone, no connection to the lore, and and they lied.
Couldn't help themselves.
My friend Hal... He curled both hands into fists of rage at that decision. And I have never seen such a thing. And it was genuine. He was just like, oh, how dare you? I was like, yes, you're right. That's how bad that film is. Like, that's how much I dislike that film. And somewhere in this one, I was like, oh, yeah, he was in Joker. Like, I just had that memory.
He did win an Oscar for it. The second actor to win an Oscar for playing the Joker.
And I just,
he's hardly the worst thing about the movie, though. I think the movie's not great, but I think he's pretty good in it. I don't know, but
that's probably true. I just try not to even think about that film. But I love that house story. That was just such that's more interesting to me than anything in the Joker. Yeah, I mean he's fine. I mean, I think you've said all it is worth kind of saying about him.
Again, the idea that he's a passenger, he's having to play this, and again, a lot of this is the writing just as much as the performance, but you're witnessing this guy who is literally a passenger in his own life. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's like, it's a dark, deep hole of depression and things going wrong. And how do you get out of it? Again, I'd say a lot of that's really the writing and directing, but you need an actor who can sell that, like Joaquin Phoenix. I don't think it's his best performance, but I do think it's a good performance. And like you said, LaRon, this is a very subdued. He's frequently not even lucid half the time.
It's just not Toni Collette,
right?
That's what I'm realizing over here. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, am I just
Toni Collette dinner scene? Like, come on.
Yeah,
there's no moment like that in this.
Not even close.
Joaquin Phoenix, while I think very good here, is just it's not a Toni Collette.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's fair. Okay, one last thing. I want to keep this part brief, but I do just for people who have not seen the movie. I want to get just a quick what was your gut reaction to the end of the film? That we will talk about in depth in spoilers, so keep this part brief. But I'm just curious because how you feel about the end for a lot of people tends to shape how they feel about the rest of the movie. So it might be good to know what they're in for. So LaRon, I'll start with you.
I'm not sure I understand it. And I'm not sure. I know when it happened, I said, well, I think we're missing something here. There's one more beat I needed from this. And maybe I'll feel differently about that on second viewing, but it left me a little, I don't mind being cold at the end of a movie, but it left me feeling cold without any answer or thread to go off of after that. So it just felt like, okay, I guess there's nothing left to say. There was so much said before this, but it feels abrupt, like the middle of a sentence just stops. So
well said. Daniel?
Yeah, and there's a part of me very similar, and there's a part of me that likes some of those abrupt endings when they're done right. This one, not so much because it
just feels like we get there and something's happening and we've built to this moment and the moment's not complete, at least not for me. And maybe I'm missing something.
What was the take? What is the takeaway you're supposed to have at the end? And I know, obviously, I don't know. I don't want them to lecture us like the end of Knock at the Cabin, but it feels like, like you said, there's just a certain, maybe even just a question. Yeah. Like there's something about, like, I'm not sure, am I supposed to be upset? Am I supposed to be laughing? Is this supposed to recontextualize the movie in a way that makes sense? Is it just like, what is it?
Yeah.
What is it trying to evoke? And maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just feels when you're already, kind of exhausted from the film being just a little bit too long.
That's all I was going to say. That's
Yeah,
all
it's
that was
like-
literally all I have to say.
I feel like if it was just like a little bit shorter, that like ambiguity, that abrupt, that mid sentence, that truncated statement, whatever it is, or whatever it's trying to say, would actually like sit better and be easier to chew on it a bit. But I feel like it was just a lot of kind of like nodding and all right, that was that. And like, I can see what it's trying to say. And there's a part of me that like, I still maintain this like false like sense of hope that things were going to really like turn around. And I think maybe
I waited for the end of the credits. I was like, the credits are rolling and he's still hollering underneath that, so it's just wondering like, okay, is something going to happen or is something, or what am I supposed to be feeling right now? So.
And I think it wants you to feel kind of nothing. But then again, it's like, is that good, or is that something I'm going to have to like revisit again? And
Is that narrative? Is it satisfying? I mean, again, even if that's the point, sometimes when you get the point, it's satisfying. But other times it's like, okay, I see the point, but also
they didn't M. Night
Shyamalan
knock at the cabinas where they tell us the point and we're like, oh, I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
It was more interesting when I didn't know.
Yes.
But you told me, and now I know too much, and now everything that came before that was actually effective now feels
right. And that was in the sentence. I thought, oh, this could be an interesting sentence, and then it's just suddenly no. It's actually just a very, very short, simple sentence.
Yeah,
this is like it stops halfway through the sentence, so you never really find out whether or not it's compelling.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
So James, outside of the runtime, anything you want to add? Exhaustion.
Why would I add to the runtime?
30 extra minutes.
Thank you, everybody. I have a lot of dad jokes. No children. There were just moments. I don't know when it started, but there were just moments in this film where I just started audibly like dad sighing, where I was like,
yeah,
and yawning. Not because maybe the dad sighing was a little passive aggressive, but I wasn't trying to be passive aggressive. It was just like
it's an exhausting movie that warrants size.
Yeah, and so once he got on the water and started heading into, I'm not stupid. I'm going back to Betty. It was like, oh, we're in the subconscious. Before we know what's around him, I knew, if you've seen Where the Wild Things Are and when Max goes in the water, you know what this is. So I knew we were doing that, and the beat wise, it felt like, okay, we're heading to the ending then. And I just sighed. I was just like, okay, let's do. Like I knew that was coming. I have some interpretations, I guess, but we'll save that.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are our spoiler-free thoughts on the film.
Spoilerishly.
Well, there's going to be some disclaimers at the top of this episode added. Letter grade. Let's give it a shot. Letter grade. What letter grade would you give the film? And James, I'll start with you.
Oh no! We have to do it now? Oh God! I was hoping for the other discussion for this letter grade. Shoot. I don't know. I really don't. I do not have a grade for this yet.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. So that's an incomplete. But
Ooh, appropriate.
I think it's
Very
appropriate. Daniel, are you going to give it the eye?
Yeah, not quite. I'm trying to guess how I'm going to feel about it, which is impossible years from now, because that's kind of how it worked with Midsommar, but I don't think this is the same at all. B feels right because I kind of liked it, but like, again, it's like, I feel like there's a lot of movies that I rate B that I'm like, well, I received them well, but like, it's hard for me to like recommend them. Whereas like if I was in the more of the A territory or above, and I think maybe that's where like Hereditary for me personally, Midsommar kind of lies. It's like easier for me to like wholeheartedly recommend them, where this one I'm like, I like it and I enjoy like each individual piece of the experience. I feel like there's like parts I really like and received well, but then there's like something about the cohesive whole that brings it a little bit down, and then just how long it is at the same time. It's like so yeah, I'm feeling like a solid B for Beau, I guess.
B for Beau, LeBron Chapman.
B for Beau. I also give it a B, and I give it a B with the disclaimer that my opinion of it may change, and I don't know if it'll go up or down, but I am curious to see it again, and not immediately though. I would like to see this with some distance from it. So I think that would be that would make the second viewing a lot more rewarding there. So I'm going to say a B. So it feels right. There's enough craft here, enough boldness here. Again, I think he's a visionary as a filmmaker. I don't know if all of his ideas coalesce as satisfyingly as I'd hope, but his ideas are at least worth a healthy discourse, which I can't say about a lot of other filmmakers.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give it an A. I don't know if I love this movie, but I love that we're going to be talking about it for a very long time and unpacking it for a very long time. And I admire the hell out of the boldness and the craft. This movie swings for the fences, so that my bias is still, I will prop up a movie that takes big swings and potentially misses versus, another very formulaic studio film that's not really taking any chances or innovating.
You really got to stop bringing Renfield up, and this is not the podcast that we're talking about.
Or superhero movies, most of them. It's a movie that at least I can say I don't think I've seen anything quite like it. It's certainly imperfect. It certainly moved me in a lot of different ways, and I'm certainly not going to forget it, and I'm certainly going to talk about it. It's a lot of certainlys. All of that to be said, I think it gets an A for me. I think I probably should watch it. No interest to do that anytime soon.
Yeah.
And Daniel, to your point, I don't know who I would recommend it to. Like, I would probably recommend it to A24 fans and Ari Aster fans. Outside of that group, I'd have to really know a person, where they're at, where their headspace is before I say, I think you should watch Beau Is Afraid. With that said, maybe there's some other things we would recommend people watch, listen to, play. So what alternate media recommendations would you pair with Beau Is Afraid? Daniel, I'll start with you.
I keep thinking about this film, watching Beau Is Afraid, and it's like another one where I recommend, but like a film that probably kind of pairs nicely. And at a time when I was younger and dumber, I really liked this director, but now he has grown a little less so for me. And it's Lars von Trier. And specifically Dogville. I think there's a lot of bleakness of that film. And if you're looking for a film that just goes into worst case scenario after worst case scenario until it reaches I feel like that film's ending is like that sentence is ended. It's just
It
ends
just-
on a very
bleak.
bleak note, but it does end itself. I don't think we get quite a bit of like confusion or a bit of a daze that Beau Is Afraid gets. But yeah, I think Dogville. For Phoenix performances, I will continue. I really like Two Lovers quite a bit and The Master, so I think I'd recommend those both. So Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master specifically. And then I have a video game, The Stanley Parable, which I think it's really the short of it is it's a character it's a first-person game, but not like a shooter or anything. And I don't think there's really any violence in it. It's just someone who is their life is being narrated, but you as a player have the freedom to go through somewhere else or do something else, but the narrator continues to try and chase you. And ultimately it's a question as to whether you have actual agency playing this video game.
It's all set in a corporate building too. So you start like in your office and then the narrator starts telling the story of the character. And like you said, you can choose to either agree or do what he says or what he doesn't say.
And the the narrator will continue to narrate every action, everything you do. But yeah, it gets more funny and sometimes it goes to some dark places, but it's mostly lighthearted. I would say if you could almost I feel like you get a little bit of the Beau Is Afraid experience from the Stanley Parable without, quite so much of the discomfort. But I don't know. I think that would be mine, the Stanley Parable.
Stanley Parable, great recommendation. Laurent Chapman, what would you recommend?
We've already mentioned the Charlie Kaufman films. We've already mentioned The Truman Show and all those. But something that I saved for this question was, and just came out, was it just this year or late last year, was Skinamarink. Because that's the first time I've seen a film in a long time where it's befuddling, but the imagery is so evocative that it made me remember sensory things at a very young age. What it felt like to be afraid to go down the stairs. What it felt like to hear voices on the other side of the door that you're not sure where they're coming from. And I imagine that, things like that. That then that kind of childlike, you can't decipher what's happening. And sometimes it could be something happening in the household that I am not at that age. I can't make out whether it's domestic abuse happening in the house, whether it's things like that, where that tension exists in the space, whether you're looking at it head on or not, because it's everywhere, and you're just not old enough to process it. And so I felt like very similar to that he's a big man child who hasn't processed or dealt with all of that. And so I felt like that is something that it reminded me a lot of. So
that is an excellent recommendation. Skinamarink, by the way, shameless plug. We actually have an interview with the executive producer, which if you're listening to this episode, is now live. That's the executive producer, Jonathan Barkan. So make sure to check that out. LaRon didn't even know he was plugging the show. James Cooper, what else would you recommend?
Job on that interview. That's great. Memoria. Did y'all see that?
Tilda Swinton.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see it. I wanted to.
I thought of it earlier and I even looked up its runtime.
It's pretty long.
Shorter.
Oh, is it? Is it?
But I mean, than this. It's shorter than, this movie. But I think what I like about that film, so if Aster is exploring anxiety and its roots and these sorts of things, I think Memoria is too, though it's not like a Kaufman type, mind bender, can't do laundry sort of thing. It's not that. But it is a very much like slow cinema. You know the plot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I would say there's a moment, again, my friend Chris and Neha, when we do these horror movie nights, we ended up pausing. Instead of doing that, we watched Memoria. And it was during award season last year. It was in my top 5. There's a moment where, as someone who actually, I can tie this all together. As someone who has anxiety, right? It's the way it works for me is it's very easy for my mind to travel to other places in terms of, oh no, my cat, or oh this or that, super easy to do that. So it's hard to quiet my thoughts and to focus singularly. Thank God for film school because, by the time I got to grad school in Stillwater, slow cinema was becoming really a thing, right? It's been fits and starts, we know for sure, across continents, across decades, right? But it's been kind of, in this fever pitch in the last, 12 years or so. And it really forces active viewing. One can't be passive, right? The idea that every single shot matters and everything within the composition is communicating theme or story, right? When there's a moment in Memoria that I won't spoil, but I'll say the experience, which was I'm realizing that for as much as I am watching this film with my friends and very engaged, I'm still having these thoughts about other things. But then there is a moment in this film where and I only realized it afterwards, it was so intentional, where sound and image have collided in such a way that I found myself suddenly so attuned to everything in that room. Everything. And I had a window up and I could hear the sounds outside too. And it was so relaxing that few things in my life can accomplish this, very few. So that's why I remember it so well. And it was so wonderful that I almost turned and told Chris and Neha that this was happening. But I realized that if I did, I would be interrupting what was this moment. And so then afterwards, I described that moment to Chris and Neha. And Chris goes, "Bunny, you should say that," because the director of that film, his whole kind of project with slow cinema is this idea that this approach can ultimately help one heal from the effects of colonialism. I'm sure what that sounds like, but it works because when you watch that film, you realize it's taking similarly to Beau Is Afraid. It starts with that, the premise of the film is this woman hears this sound, and when she hears it, she can't unhear it, but no one else can hear it. But it's just this thing that's ongoing, and she's in a city. And so the city plays a very key role in terms of its effect on causing anxiety in her. And then she's in nature later, although I guess one could argue urban is nature, but you get the idea here. She's in a more rural setting for the scene that I'm describing. And I don't know. I think that film I found healing. And I'm not sure I find that in Aster's film, like that's not happening. And so then I'm wondering in some ways, like, well, why did this man just put us through this? And it's kind of to your point, Daniel, earlier. It was something I wanted to affirm you on when you said in some of your earlier thoughts, like, who do you recommend this to? And would you recommend it to someone with anxiety? And I would have a hard time doing that, even though I'm absolutely someone, and it seems Aster believes this too. I'm someone who believes that, art can be cathartic in that Greek way. And in the middle of this film is that whole story moment, right? Where it's about, do you see yourself in the story? So I think he believes that. It's just, I think Memoria just like mops the floor in terms of like its conversation with someone who might be experiencing that, or maybe someone who doesn't understand it, and the healing from it. And I don't mean in a wishy-washy, like, go watch this, like, feel good, eat, love, pray. No, that's not what I mean. I'm telling you, it is cinema. It is Bergman. It is Hitchcock. It is Sergei Eisenstein. Like, that's what I think is happening in Memoria.
Yeah.
Here, sure, yeah, okay, I guess.
I don't know. I think that's kind of alluded, like, related to what we were talking about earlier. It doesn't feel like there's any sense of closure. Like, if I was a person with anxiety, I feel like this movie would more than likely increase. It would trigger you. Yeah. Is more likely to trigger you than to help you confront certain things,
and to enlighten you in any
right.
type of way.
Right.
And that's It feels like, I don't want to say what's the point, but there's that level of like, it's very effectively about what it's about. But by the end of it, it's like, but what am I taking away from this? And that's what I'm saying. Like, did it satisfy me as that closing moment? I'm like, I'm fine being put through the ringer. Like, fuck me up, please. I want to. That's what I go to the movies for. I can watch, a mental mind fuck movie, but I want to leave feeling like I got something to chew on that is like, even if it's like a revelation in myself, like, okay, that was rough, but I now have something to mine through, and I'm not sure I do at the end of this movie.
And you're making me remember American Psycho. Like, it's because I think it's important what you're saying. Like, I don't need, and same with Mulholland Drive. Like, I don't need the Memoria, like, calming, healing thing that it does. I don't need that every time, right? That's what's so magical about that film experience. But the story's got to work, and the ambiguity at the end of both Mulholland Drive and American Psycho feels fine. That's fine. Like, that's fine. I don't need this nice, pretty, like, bow on everything. I didn't even try that. But it just, I don't know. And I know I must sound so negative about this film. You kind of nailed it earlier when you were like, is it mixed to negative? I think that's kind of where I'm at. But I also understand this masterpiece thing. I get how someone gets there. I get it.
I think it's going to have an impact on the people who watch it, positive or negative.
Sure.
And in that way, I think it's certainly elevated. Now, I could, like, a year from now, rewatch it, or think and be like, actually, that was a net negative for me, for the people watching it. So actually, it's probably not great. I don't know. That's where it lives in that ambiguous area. Right now, I'm feeling more like on the masterpiece side.
See, and I'm mid leaning positive, but I'm still mid right now because there's too many hangups.
But even American Psycho, I walk away from that movie feeling like I know the questions I'm supposed to be asking.
Yeah.
In this movie, I don't think that's super clear. I mean, there are certain questions that are clear, but there's also a lot that's not.
Too many people complained that Midsommar was too laid out and too obvious, so he made his next movie just completely.
Yeah. Firstly, I'll recommend the Alfred Hitchcock classic. We've already mentioned it off the air, but Psycho, if you want to watch a movie about a son who has been deeply, deeply traumatized by his mother, I think I'm excited to rewatch that movie having watched Beau Is Afraid, because there's definitely quite a bit of overlap in terms of some of the ideas they may be exploring there. I'm going to go lighter, and even though I already took a jab at superhero stuff earlier in the podcast, these are two Batman recommendations, because I just think a lot of our listeners probably like Batman. The Batman the Animated Series episode, Perchance to Dream, is an episode where Bruce Wayne, he wakes up and he's in a world where he's Bruce Wayne, not Batman. And even though it's only like a 22-minute episode, it's really exploring the psychology of the character and what is he sacrificing? What is his trauma rooted at? It's begging some interesting questions about the character in a very digestible format that I think both adults and children can enjoy. And if you want to just go on just the more adult skewing Batman psychology, takes it kind of another step deeper, I would say. Batman Arkham Asylum, the graphic novel, not to be confused with the games. I'm talking about the Grant Morrison graphic novel. And the reason I recommend it, it's very focused on the psychology, but I also just think genuinely the art in that novel is really stunning. And there's not too many others that I think have successfully copied it, so to speak. Well, with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not want to be spoiled, asterisks, on Beau Is Afraid, go ahead and tune out now. First topic I want to hit on here is living in an anxious world. We've already talked about that. I think we generally think that's one of the things it does well. The inciting incident at the beginning of the movie is Beau loses his keys, and from there it's a perpetual escalation over the course of 3 hours until it concludes with some wacky trial in front of mostly strangers and a handful of people he kind of knows. So I'm just curious. I want to, as much as we can in a limited time podcast, how do you think this film uses these various chapters? I want to say there's 5 of them, if I'm counting correctly. How does he use different chapters of the journey to underscore different aspects of his anxiety? Daniel, you're making eye contact with me, so I'm starting with you.
Dang it. I was afraid of that.
Afraid.
No, I won't be. Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Right.
It's okay.
I'll be brave. I don't know, because I wonder, because when we were talking about the conclusion of the film too, we were mentioning like, what are we supposed to like really learn from the film? And it's very hard for me to think of maybe what I'm learning and what portions of it are productive. But it is this like comedy of errors that just dominoes into perpetually worse and worse case scenarios somehow. And I wonder if in an odd way, seeing that and seeing these horrible things happen that are just so ridiculous to be believed can in any way. I don't know if it did for me personally, but it did make me laugh, I guess. And I wonder if it like quells our own anxieties to some extent. I don't know, because there are also things that's missing. Like he does, get face to face with, the anxiety of just society around him is a big part of it. The society of, a normal, or the anxiety, of a like, being in a semi-normal family for him, or being able to have whatever, the romantic relationship he seems to long to. And then just having any sense of community. I think one of the few things we're missing, because I continually get this sense of being like splayed and etherized and dissected. But I'm like, wow, a job interview is really like a little bit like the application process. I feel like I just want to see, even though to our understanding, Beau probably has never worked, or there is nothing about like any kind of idea about, what he is professionally, if anything. I think it makes it clear that there really isn't anything, nor does it matter. But
it's ambiguous, but I kind of got the impression that his mom paid for everything.
Yeah, that was kind of,
because he lived in her housing. Mm-hmm. His food was her boxed meals.
Exactly. Yeah, it was all her ultimately, and so I think that.
And if he had a job, it was probably a fake job that she arranged for him.
Just random thing. But I do wonder about that. If that if it does anything productive with it. I mean, it definitely conveys anxiety, and I think it does it, pretty effectively. But then what it actually is trying to say about it, I begin to question that. There's another recent film with like Infinity Pool, and I think Infinity Pool's dissection of Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool, its dissection of like masculinity a bit. And I'm like, it seems like it's so good at like identifying things and identifying issues and identifying fears
without saying anything about it.
But it doesn't like say much of anything productive about it. And that was actually part of my concern with this film. And then again, and I'm like, do we need to expect Aster to say anything like this? If this is truly like a deeply personal film, which it probably is, I would say, from as far as I can tell,
it's a very, very, very expensive therapy session.
Yeah.
That someone else, that a studio is bankrolling.
Exactly. And it's like, what? Yeah. I don't know. It's just kind of hard to get. So, I mean, there's these instances, they definitely bookend anxiety, and I definitely feel anxious to some extent. And I think a lot of our laughter is part of it is genuinely hits the punchlines, but then there's also just, it's kind of a nervous laughter in certain instances, especially in that second act when you get, Nathan Lane's family. And that's,
which we didn't even talk about Nathan Lane, who delivers one of the weirdest performances in this movie
Yes.
that I found delightful, because it was so off-putting by how his cheerfulness and his, hey, old buddy, like it just was so, you're like, what is this guy got, like bodies in the basement? Like, what is going on?
The sheer disregard for like this guy is clearly spiraling. Yeah. It's just like, everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
Yeah. And that's what I wonder. I do wonder what it truly like underscoring, or what if it does say anything other than just present it to you. And it becomes very hard for me to, again, parse that mess of anxiety. It almost just feels a bit like both simultaneously an assault, to the point where, I guess things aren't quite so bad.
I mean, you outlined, though, I mean, there's several different chapters we're going through. I mean, the first one is sort of like his day-to-day. He's a life in the city. So the fears of, being surrounded by complete strangers. Then you have the fear of what would it be like to be in a real family, followed by what would it be like to be in a non-judgmental community.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually he arrives, to his mom's funeral, and where his anxiety is very visceral because it's so direct. I think so. I think you're onto something by kind of outlining these are different fears that one probably has about the world we're living in. And I thought the way that he presented them was compelling.
Yeah.
In that, it wasn't just a normal family. It was a family that was apparently being held hostage by his mom, with a daughter who is also apparently having her own mental health frustrations, parents who were kind of, it just, all of that stuff seemed really compelling. Now, does it fit together in a meaningful way? I'm not sure, but I think is almost like his very lengthy vignettes, the air quotes Jewish Lord of the Rings, like it fits. Go on a journey, James, what did you think about the different kind of chapters of the journey?
I yawned again, like right now, and that's how I was in the movie, because I was so tired watching that movie. I don't know. Daniel, you're just saying like a lot of what I'm thinking, if I'm being honest, and I really just want to applaud your opinions that you have. Because, I don't know. I loved, for instance, this guy who's in the ceiling with his. I sound like Herzog right now. Like, I love this guy who's in the ceiling.
Please do the accent.
Yeah, no.
But I do. I like this stuff when he's in the tub, and
I forgot about that.
That is so wonderful. That is wonderful stuff. In terms of performance, like Parker Posey over Joaquin.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that's great. I don't know. I just, man, God, you guys keep naming these other films, and I just keep finding myself wanting to talk about those films over this one. Like,
yeah, like to some extent, I feel like there's like that transition from like construct and society and like urbanized setting, and then to eventually the woods, and then back into the reintegration of society. Like I think of The Lobster a lot, but I'm like, that film kind of does some of the things that Beau is trying to accomplish a little bit. It's not about the same thing entirely, but it does reflect on certain fears we have. That one primarily with romance, but then it's like, it does it so much faster, and it's like a little more, like it's still somewhat ambiguous, but I feel like it's also a little bit more direct. Not to say it's as much of a spectacle as this movie, and I think that's where this is. And like, now that you're mentioning those scenes, and then I'm like, have this flood of like, oh, these individual scenes are just like great. Like, but then it's like, what whole do they create, and what does it yield ultimately? And did it do anything for you? Because you mentioned, James, like you're in, going into it, and like I don't think it did anything for my anxiety personally. Like I don't know if it made me understand it better or anything like that. Do you think it helped in any way, or like could it be productive in that way?
Well, two things directly. One is it upped my anxiety. Like there were moments where as I was watching it, I like right now I have actually a very similar outfit to what I have on right now, right? With the jean jacket and then the hoodie on underneath it, and then a shirt underneath that. And I don't know which point in the movie, but somewhere in the film, I started feeling like clammy, and like, oh God, and I was like, well, what am I gonna? I need to lean forward, like, do I need to take off the coat? Do I need to take off the hoodie? And I was like, wait, no, this is the movie. Like, I realized like I'm having an anxiety kind of thing happening in response to this. That's one thing. I don't know how helpful that is. You know what I mean?
Right.
But what I will say is helpful and was at the beginning of the film, which was, a good laugh also. But the moment, I can't remember what question his therapist asked about, like, does he feel guilty about something? And, Beau pauses a little bit, and then it cuts to the close-up of where the therapist writes guilty on the notepad. That led to me, and I was talking to my friend Aaron about this today, like that led to me thinking about the concept of guilt as, I think a lot as someone with anxiety and someone who thinks, again, psychoanalytically about film, the role that shame plays in shaping us. So, I'm very much someone who thinks about shame and the role that, how our parents can instill that, how ideology or religion, right, can do that to us, and how, especially as a queer person, really one has to work at unpacking and undoing and replacing thoughts of shame, that people have put in our minds, right? And quite frankly, even as people of color, right? Because there's, the mark of Cain, this sort of silliness, right? Or the black body just is for slavery, or
you got 2 strikes before you open your mouth, and you have to ask yourself, like, so I've already done something wrong according to society, like from the jump, and so it's very. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, because you have to start telling yourself that what I'm being taught, is not the truth, but you're conditioned to it for so long that you believe it about yourself before you have any reason to. And so, yeah, it's a process of unlearning and turning the other way.
And the wild gaslighting, whether intentional or not, of people who don't know that experience, who are like, well, get it, bro. Which is kind of the Nathan Lane character,
we don't get it right. What's wrong?
Like,
toxic positivity.
Yeah, it's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not racist, and I think that,
I think you're fine.
You're pretty smart. You're doing great. And it's like, yeah, good. Yes, yes. Like that's, oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. That's wow.
Do you think, instead of a catharsis, do you think this movie could actually maybe help demonstrate to people who either A, are anxious and don't realize they're anxious, or B, kind of demonstrate for people who maybe haven't struggled with anxiety in a visceral way? Because I think the movie does a great job at capturing that on the screen, the feeling. Do you think it could maybe help educate or awaken those people, perhaps?
I think 2 things on that. Because, and this kind of goes, I don't remember what you said. One of you said something smart earlier on this note where I think on the one hand, yes, because I think I already said this earlier, but as I was driving, right, to the theater and that Fox News thing came on, it kind of set the stage for me to, in those opening, 30 minutes, 40 minutes when he's in the city setting, just be like, oh, this is someone who is subscribing ultimately to this sort of idea that the cities are dangerous and scary and, got to build a wall, that sort of stuff. I think if you showed this to them, like, this is how ludicrous you all.
Yeah.
This is how you look.
Yeah.
Do you understand? This is ludicrous the way you're thinking. Like, so in that way, yeah, I think it's, in a funny way, it's like, this is literally like, this is what you sound like to me. Like, this is like, I don't know how to make this clear. So on that note, yes. However, when I think of who would watch this film. I think actually both Caleb and Daniel kind of talked about this, but like, I don't know. I don't think a Baptist pastor is going to watch this movie. I just don't. Yeah. And I would suggest that a Baptist pastor is very likely to be someone like Beau, like, to vote like Beau, scare the cities and these. And that's not my opinion. That is the data who tells us who's voting for Republicans and more likely to have that kind of, to be a Trump supporter, right? Or a DeSantis supporter. Not my numbers, And so, like, would that person watch a movie that's got this rating, right? No. But let's say they do. How long before they turn it off? Pretty early, considering like the language. I mean, what you have for me, hilariously graffitied, like, what's it say? Kill the Pope or kill children, eat the Pope. I can't remember. I mean, tongue in cheek stuff. But like, if you're a person who you're gonna find that pretty offensive, just say nothing of the dick in the ceiling. Like, you're not. So I don't think that viewer is like hey, I'll be hopeful. Sure, good. Like, set them down for Beau Is Afraid. But no, I don't think that audience is going to watch this movie. That audience would no. Right?
Right. No, I think you're right there.
Very hard sell.
It would be a very tough sell.
Pay them, maybe.
Maybe you could appeal to the people who liked Hereditary, who fall in that. Because I do think there are people in that demographic who they like.
They're here for that
horror.
And
yeah.
If so you could get someone there. I think your earlier assessment, like the A24 fan, they're absolutely going to be here for this. But I am suggesting that there is a whole audience that there is absolutely no way.
Right. A very large, the majority of people, in fact.
This is not my ask. I would ask them to watch it. I would ask anyone. I think everyone should watch everything. Like, you know what I mean?
It's just funny because, we live in mental health has been discussed so much in the last decade, especially the last 5 years. Yet very few meaningful things have been done by our institutions.
What?
Right. To support mental health. And it feels like this is probably a movie.
You're preaching now.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm just proposing that you're right. And it just makes me sad. Because this is a real problem that people are willing to acknowledge is a real problem. But when you try to demonstrate, well, here's what this is like, it's a hard sell because it makes them uncomfortable. And that's the thing. This movie is designed to make you uncomfortable, whether you end up liking the fact that it does that or not. If it makes people uncomfortable, language, violence, graffiti, giant dicks in the ceiling, people are going to turn it off and they're going to write it off and say, well, this thing was bullcrap because it's got X, Y, and Z in it. Or the fact that they did that undermines the credibility. So I don't know. It's just a shame because I do think, in my opinion, one of the things it does better is demonstrate the condition of anxiety. And there is a need for education for what people who maybe either don't recognize they have it or don't understand it because they haven't experienced it. There's a huge need for that out there. But I am preaching. Thank you.
Okay. Right.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about Beau's mom. So eventually we learn that his mom has actually been watching him and is very likely responsible for every incident that has happened to him throughout the film, further breaking down both Beau's sense of freedom and his reality. Now, even that premise is somewhat squishy. Before the podcast, we were talking about, like, was this all a dream or was she actually alive the whole time? And so I just want to turn to you all. I mean, how does the reveal about the fate of Beau's mom reshape its sense of reality? Laurent, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it definitely questions everything you watched before, because I'm very much, as I'm riding on this wave in a really long wave, I imagined once we got to the house, like the journey is that he's going to get to his mom and then we're going to have a revelation of some sort in that space. And we do, but we also don't, in the final act. I feel like in that moment, then again, it makes me wonder, did he ever leave his house? Is he still sitting there like imagining every scenario that could happen if he, goes a step further. Like we really don't know, because everything has something that's a little off kilter, in every chapter of this story that, it's up to interpretation. This is his mind. We're in the psychology of him, his psyche. So I think it's actually, it makes it more interesting for me at that point. That's the part of it, the movie that I do love, is not knowing what was real and what wasn't real. Because then it makes those individual moments a lot more interesting to mine through. It's just that when we look at the objective of the film, that's where I feel like there's a void here. I don't know that it's saying anything. It's exposing anxiety, because I think the previous question was, how does it, note his anxiety? I feel like it doesn't say much about it. But it does. I did feel a lot. I felt a lot of it. So, but did I learn it? Did I learn anything about it? That's the problem, and that's the issue I have. And maybe it's there. And like I said, maybe you're not going to get that on one viewing, or maybe it's devoid of that altogether. But that's the struggle I'm having with it, because I think it's very effective at showing what anxiety is like, but not saying what to do about it. And if you're not telling me what to do about it, or not at least giving me something to roll with after this, then I'm like, yeah, I know what anxiety is like. I live with it. Thanks. So what else? I got the medication for it. So that's the thing. It's just that's the aspect of it where I want to say that this film has merit. I just don't know what that is. And so.
But you think that the fact that Beau's mom is, air quotes, alive is weird enough to have you begging the reality of the entire film?
I wanted it to be real, so that this character who'd been through hell, could have some closure. It could have some, whatever, even if it wasn't like all tight and neat, like at least like, okay, I came here and now I know what I need to do. And it's going to take a while, and at some point, I'm going to come to a place of healing. I just don't think by the end of this movie, there's any healing. It's just kind of misery porn, by the time you get to the end. That's a good one. And that's how I feel about the whole project. It's misery porn. It's effective, but it's still, I don't come away with it with anything to, I don't know. To mine through about its overall objective. So,
Daniel, what did you make of the reveal about Beau's mom?
Yeah, it started to make me wonder if it, even though I loved like the character as far as the performance is concerned, and
who was Patti LuPone is fantastic in the role. I thought great. I felt, but
yeah, I agree, and I wouldn't want to miss that, but I began to wonder if it matters if Beau's mother really is alive, because everything that evokes an action out of Beau, it's a fear. That fear is associated strongly with his mother, but it's like every scene, it's like the only thing that gets Beau from point A to point B in any given instance is that fear, that the fact that he is afraid continues to animate them. I mean, appropriately, but like, it's always just this like perpetual fear, and because he is like enamored and just ensnared by that fear, and that is the only thing that really drags him. That's when we actually get the really explosive, when his fear hits such a point that he can no longer bear the situation, be it the guy suspended above his bathtub, or he thinks he's going to die because he didn't take some medication with water, or Jeeves is chasing him outside of the fort, which is that's like a more legitimate. I mean, I would run from that, but I would run from everything he kind of runs. So like, that's the thing, but it's like that fear is ultimately what truly is in control. And it really doesn't, to me, it started to feel like it doesn't matter if your mom is dead or alive, that specter that your mom has. I mean, she already helicopter parented you enough to where you are caught in the propellers and you're losing limbs. And at that point, the only thing that does evoke you is that fear, that continued fear. And even in the final moments when he like she dies again, I guess in a roundabout way, where he strangles her and she falls into that like conveniently placed terrarium or whatever. Well, I can't tell if that was like a reptile habitat or something. Either way, she falls into this thing. She returns almost immediately. And like, whether or not that really mattered, because even then he is still just afraid of his mother, even in her demise. And even in it's just that specter. And I don't know. It's I don't know if her reveal of her being alive makes too much of a difference, because ultimately it's just that fear is so deep and so innate that there really isn't a difference whether or not she exists or not,
because he's the one that has to change.
Yeah.
He's the one that has to do something differently, whether she's alive or not. He has to go back home to himself. And so
exactly
that omnipresent, she's everywhere, it affects him just as much when she's not present physically, so yeah.
Well, his whole life's been built that way. We discover when he arrives at the house, you see kind of her wall of all her professional accomplishments were all based on products that she designed to, in one way or another, protect Beau. And it appears, or at least my hypothesis is, everything in his world, even in his apartment, all of it's constructed by her.
The emblems on everything, like the microwave, the food he's eating, the what do you call it, the frozen dinner he has. It has the MW on it. It's like she's everywhere, in his space. So
because she was so protective, he was never able to develop the tools he needed to mature, to grow, to face conflict, to make decisions for himself. It's one of those things where, because of that, I don't think there is a reality. Whether she's alive or dead, there's not a reality where he's able to handle these things in a healthy manner. And because even when he, air quotes, overcomes his mom in the strangling scene, he's lashing out in violence.
Yeah.
Right? Is that really a healthy way to deal with your parental issues? To lash out against your parents who you think failed you or manipulated you in one way or another? Or, James, is it, as you put it earlier, it's more of an unpacking process, removing these thoughts and replacing them with new, healthier thoughts. The movie, that's the thing the movie I think is kind of missing on the, like, what do you do in place of this thing? But yeah, I don't know, James, what did you make of the reveal about Beau's mom at the end being alive?
Wait, did you all see, I think it came out in 2012. It was a documentary called The Pervert's Guide to Ideology.
Yes. Zizek.
Right? Yes,
I did not.
And is Zizek? Okay. I think I've seen it.
Which is the only appropriate response to Zizek, right? It's just like, what is this little imp?
Yeah, I've seen it.
So, I mean, that's largely, right, how I watch film is, again, from that either ideological filter or, psychoanalytic. I can't help it. It just is what it's my training, I guess, now. But no, actually, I think the medium ask for it because it's about voyeurism and looking, right? It is what it is. So in that sense, especially after hearing you all talk, I'm not sure that anything in this film is quote unquote the real. Like it's not reality. And I don't mean this like in that late 90s, early 2000s indie, like, was it all a dream sort of thing. But it just feels like this movie itself is an exploration of just the concept of anxiety and guilt, like how they work. Probably more guilt.
Yeah.
And how that manifests as
the
anxiety.
therapist literally writes that.
That's what I mean. It's at the beginning of the film. The film opens this way. So I don't think anything weird. I'm not even sure. And I don't even think it matters whether or not it's real or not. But it just seems like it is ultimately a film that is about this sort of, it's almost like, like a psychoanalytic exploration of, like, all of us, our parents shape our value system, right? And they are the product of the dominant kind of ideological, stance of a particular society. And by that I mean like capitalism or communism or socialism. You choose your country, right? This is going to play out. The institutions in a country, the media, the places of worship, the family instill, even if they don't think of it as like indoctrination, they are passing down, right, to us, the value system, and then also passing down their own, psychoses, right? They're at that very individual level. So all of that's operating on the child, right? And so, yeah, like whether or not she is alive and is still alive and she's surveying him, or whether or not she literally was putting the names of the that he's eating her products. I think the film is really just telling us, like, yeah, this woman has influence. The family influences us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular guy's instance, he seems to be of a wealthy class, and whether or not he's actually literally eating the family's products, like, her money has made him, right? It's shaped his whole world. And he does not seem capable of unpacking any of that, right? He's been coddled, right, in this sort of way by that wealth. That he's never had really agency because he can't even make decisions for himself.
Yeah, and it's a realistic fear, but I think of the opening scene too, and like the moment he's born, you hear his mother just like, is he breathing? Why isn't he crying? Why isn't he doing this? Why isn't he this? Why isn't basically exactly what I expected my birth to go? And eventually he does cry. But yeah, it's like that immediate, like the first thing we see of Beau, and it's his, which it feels like it makes sense in that context of like a birth and a child being born, but that her concern is a little more than just, it doesn't sound like a woman who's just given birth, to be honest. It sounds like someone who's like very, like she's already
sinking her claws and her influence is already kind of
The question I have, sorry, you were going to say something.
Okay.
No, the question I have, because I'm willing to put this like psychoanalytic model onto this film for sure. It's begging for it. I mean, there is a character called Therapist, right? It's just right there. I think the question I can't quite answer though is, I'm here for that critique, like that ideological, critique and of the society and all these things. But like, I'm wondering, is it putting too much of that on the figure of the mother in this is set in America, the film seems. Am I wrong? I don't know.
Yes.
I think so.
We're not a matriarchal society. We are a patriarchal society.
Very much so.
By law, we have been that. And right now we're living through such a backlash, right, in terms of like, I mean, the Roe versus Wade ruling, the abortion medication that, this is like a swing back to a version of feudalism that said that women were property and they can't own property, and they can't choose their own partners and these sorts of things. Like America's kind of heading in some very scary ways, right? That's the tension we're experiencing. So we were born out of patriarchy. The laws said in the country until 1921, white women were still property, and black and brown people had to like fight that. And women until the 60s, and you have McCurtain County down there being like, I sure do wish we could go back and treat black people, how we used to. I mean, that's not my words. That's that guy's words. So all that to say, like the fact that the movie expends so much of its energy that the agency lacking force is personified within the mother figure. That's kind of a hard pill to swallow, because that's not this country's experience. Yes, it is true, right? Like that white women historically, we know, have sided with, right, the patriarchy. We know that's true during the Civil War, even though the push for suffrage was there. We know that often the push for suffrage was at the expense of black and brown women by white women. We know that that's true in terms of lesbians and bisexual women. They would push back against them and their inclusion in the feminist movement in the first and second waves. So yeah, we know white women's complicity. The Tulsa Race Massacre is the story of white women's complicity in upholding a patriarchal white supremacist society. I know all that. It's just does this movie know all that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and where is it? I mean, again, I get it. It ultimately says, I don't really have much to say about the father. Like, yeah, I get it. He's a dick. Like, that's what it's, I guess, is saying by having the giant dick upstairs. And maybe that's the critique we need of capitalism and patriarchy. But just spent so much time on the mom.
Well, and this is where, I'm confident there are men who have been psychologically traumatized by their mothers.
Oh, sure.
Right. So I don't want to say that like we shouldn't make a movie, there shouldn't be a movie made about it, because that is an experience that I'm confident is happening. Now, is that the experience you want to put in your very expensive movie that's blasted out into the masses right now? That's a fair question. But I do think that there is probably some personal history here.
I think if Ari Aster was speaking a little bit more about his intention behind making this, and he's not. He's very evasive and about the meaning behind the film, and you just watch it, and I'm not giving any answers. And I think if this could be a very specific movie, this could be a very singular movie. Like this could be Ari Aster's childhood. This could be Ari Aster's this is what my mother did to me. And if he said that, then I could come off of it trying to, extract so much meaning from everything and say that this was another person's experience and he's just telling us about it. But because he's being so, elusive, it makes it makes it this mystifying thing where it's like, what are you saying about us or other people or society or whatever? And and he's not denouncing or, it does feel, as you said, if it's not specific to him, it does feel very kind of cringily misogynistic in the way that there's not enough blame put on the other side of the pendulum here. Like if it was even, like my parents did this to me, it is my mother did this to me. So are you saying this, or are you saying that's for you, or is that?
But maybe from the character of Beau, it is his mom. His dad was never around, and that's part of the. I mean, you could say that's part of. That's where again it just gets.
It's a choice, though.
Dicey. It is a choice,
though. That you made a deliberate choice to make this hinge on the sins of the mother, so to speak. Bleeding off into him in some capacity. So that's the thing. Is like, did it affect him personally? Or does he have something to say about, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, and don't disagree, but I also don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, how many movies about daddy issues have been made about men and daddy issues? Literally, like since the beginning of cinema, right? Yeah. And I think it's fair to explore maternal trauma as well. It needs to be done with delicacy, and I think again, you raise very valuable points about the context in which we're talking about them. And I do think a little more clarity in the intention probably would have helped. But then would we be talking about this movie for 2 hours if it was clear?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I could easily see this, being taken, misinterpreted by the wrong people and used as a weapon of propaganda for men's rights activists. Definitely. Yeah, that's a possibility.
Didn't that happen with Joaquin Phoenix's movie?
I was as you two were just talking, I'm just like going, because sometimes one of the things especially in film we're really guilty of is you talk about the director in terms of the auteur, and we forget to talk about the star, right, as kind of an auteur as well. I don't know if auteur is the right word, but we forget that we can look across a actor's body of work to start looking for certain themes, right, to emerge. Yeah. And Joker, again, hate that film. I think it has some incredibly problematic representation of women and people of color. And so to see then this movie in terms of of a choice for him to make that a follow-up film, I don't know. There's something weird. So it made me start thinking about The Master. I'm like, well, what was going on in that? And I can't remember.
This is gonna sound really harsh, and I don't think Joaquin Phoenix. I think he's an incredibly talented actor, but in terms of and I didn't say it earlier, but basically what I'm trying to get at is the dude has really honed in on playing incels for the last 10 years. You know what I mean? Or incel adjacent characters, people who are mentally unwell. There's frequently they have some sort of sexual. They've been traumatized and it has affected their sexual psychology. And I think this is consistent in several of the movies, even Her, which is a great movie, by the way. But that's a different aspect of it. And that one's definitely a much more positive.
Love that film.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. But even in that movie, he's kind of exploring the ideas of what is a relationship, what is love, what is healthy, what is right, you know? So it is, I don't know what it means.
No, I hadn't even thought of Her in that way. You're exactly right.
But you're right. He is kind of picking a lot of characters that kind of fall in that line of thought, or that he's clearly trying. Joaquin Phoenix I feel like is clearly trying to work something out, just like Ari Aster in this movie is trying to work something out.
Yeah,
and I feel like the thing about the exploration of that character type, I'm here for that. You know, going back to Zizek documentary, he spends a lot of time on Taxi Driver, right?
Yeah.
Which is wonderful film. So I don't have a problem at all with the exploration of this type of character, because this type of character is clearly like dominating. In fact, we'll call it Western civilization right now, like in terms of like the school shootings, the Norwegian bombing and stuff. I mean, like, this is a type of guy this guy just leaked documents, on a Discord game thing. What in the world? I mean, that's who we're, yes. That sentence, by the way.
Well, even I'm thinking about like male loneliness, like the recent studies that have come out about adult male loneliness being a real factor that my hypothesis has been there for a while. We just haven't really explored it, but there's been a lot of research done around male adults who are single, who don't have a lot of friends.
Yeah.
So yes, that's a long way of saying that is a dominant group within our culture currently.
So I don't, again, explore all this. I still think my bottom line is 3 hours. 3 hours. Okay.
All right. Well, we could talk about, I had an entire other section mapped out for the Oedipus complex.
What, in this movie?
Yeah. Yeah, right. So I want to bring it back I'm going to boil it down to one question, because it really gets the heart of what I wanted to talk about. And James, you've already hit it on the head, which is the connection between guilt, control, sex, and maternal love. The movie is sort of, all of these things are connected. It's kind of a web, though. It's not like a straight line.
Yeah.
What is this trying to say about the role sexuality plays with Beau, and how he acts or doesn't act, or his lack of ability to act? I'm just curious about the psychology of that, because I think at the core of it, it seems like his fear all stems from his mother, because she coddled him, as you said earlier. And we haven't talked about the sex angle, which is where she literally told him when he was a kid if he had sex, was it sex or released?
It was an orgasm.
An orgasm.
Yeah.
So if he had an orgasm, he would die. So I want to open up that can of worms as a final discussion point.
Is it guilt, shame, control?
Yeah.
And
guilt, shame, guilt, control, and sex, and the maternal love.
I mean, his fear of intimacy is apparent. I mean, we get is the character Elaine. That's the Parker Posey character, both iterations. You can just see like how, like, she's giving him an opportunity to, obviously, like, I'm consent. You can do this. We can, and he is paralyzed by the idea of it, and it's because, again, of the way his mom has kind of perverted his perception of sex. And when we finally get that amazing sex scene between him and Parker that's probably
twist.
Probably my favorite part of the movie, to be honest with you. When they played Mariah Carey to it, they soundtracked to that, I said, okay, well, we're going here. So, and then the mother's immediate reaction, the immediate thing that happened, he finally has release. He does release. And he actually, it seemed for a moment, it's the first time he sighed, and the first time he felt pleasure, or felt like, all this time I've been waiting to just be able to let this go, everything that I have. And then as soon as he does, he's made to regret it, because his mother shames him for the feeling and the sensation. And this is what you did in my bed, and this is what so he's not allowed to, to feel that, to feel those kinds of emotions. And so
Without there being a caveat.
without there being exactly, that guilt, that shame attached to it. And I think we can all relate to that, especially queer people. I think we can relate to that. The idea that, your thoughts are impure, or if you're in religious settings, the things that come natural, for you you're being told are things that, we're not allowed.
Yeah. And I mean, just from a straight person's perspective, the closest relationship I can have with that is the Christian setting, which is if you release, you're sin. Basically, if you release, you are sinning against God and women and your body.
Yeah.
It's weird, Daniel.
Yeah, and it's almost like joy or whatever could bring him joy, or even just like a mild comfort. It's always bookended with like, because I experience this comfort or because I experience joy, there is a negative consequence, and it's that shame from my mother. And I think it's very telling that in the sequence, and it's because we are in the spoiler section now. So basically what happens is he finally has sex with this woman he's envisioned. Even in the act of sex, he's like very passive, like she kind of has to assume the control. So again, he's still very etherized and splayed, but he's at least present. But then, he orgasms and it's fine. He's not dead, and he's like baffled. And like part of it is there's this like momentary sense of relief, like I didn't die. And then it's like the reverse is basically true, is like they continue to have sex for a moment, and then Elaine, this character, she is like instantly rigor mortis or something and is dead and stiff. And then that's when his mother comes out, right? Like that's the first time we see the mother it's basically after
the reveal of her being alive.
And it's an immediate, like, you are shame. And you know what? Like this lie that you couldn't have sex and or you couldn't orgasm, and that's what was going to kill you. Like that was me just protecting you from the real truth. And it was like that, just that continue. What's worse than what the curse that I already apparently have, something
that killed someone else.
Yes. And then it's also that it's just like there is nothing he can do, no moment of even like having a good time. And that's the thing is, and this film makes a point, is we don't see any pleasure, and even the things that would make Beau feel whole, when we get that dream sequence out with the community. I cannot remember the name of the the theater group that they
Orphans in the Woods,
something like that. Yeah. And when he finally has that moment, and he has there's that semi-animated sequence and everything like that. And there are moments of him feeling joy and feeling purpose and feeling fulfilled. But then, because of that one lie, because of his inability to have sex, even the one fantasy we're really awarded, the one true fantasy, I think, that we're awarded, and get to see,
and have some agency.
Yeah, some
try
agency.
And engage and do something, or try.
And we say
pursue
agency.
Something.
Exactly, but it's funny that entire sequence is being like dictated to him and being narrated. Like the woman who's in, orchestrating the play, she's like, and has that the angel, I guess she's like portraying an angel or something, and she's, telling me you'll go on to do this, and then you'll go on to do this, and then you'll do that, and he's just following that verbatim. It really isn't his. It's not even like his fantasy, but he goes through the motions.
He wants that, though. It sounds pretty appealing, right? Because at the end of it, he has the great joy of being reunited with his three sons. Something that he's longed for.
But he
then realizes that
and it's like, but incapable of having sex, or too arguably too afraid. But he's got this basically this lie that he's internalized, that understandably, that like it's impossible for him to have those. And I think that's very telling, that like so much of what he wants is just like shut down. What we get to see that he wants, because I question what does Beau want but to not be terrified. I guess it's kind of that, and that seems like such a base level, like that minimal security, even though he has the most security, really, because he's from a really affluent family, and ultimately everything is sustained by his mother in this way, which again I don't like, feels a little weird to what you mentioned earlier, Laurent, without Aster elaborating one of these few moments where I think that might help. Often I'm like, directors, filmmakers, they need to like, don't tell me what you want me to take from it, because I don't care. And I feel like the few interviews I've had with directors when I was dumb enough to ask that question was not received super well. So I think I've learned better now. But at the same time, it's just, it's all because he cannot have sex or cannot, feel comfortable in getting that release. And even though when he does, the film still takes an opportunity to be like, well, let's play into like, this is the worst case scenario and this is bad. And I don't know. It just, I guess, plays back into his fear too at the same time, that he's just so just afraid and paralyzed by it that there is no joy. There is no real life for you, Beau, because it's...
And that's partially why I have issues with the ending, because that moment when you're in this space, and you said going back into the subconscious I saw that cabin as like he was going into his mother, like back into the womb or back into the, and maybe maybe I'm reaching, but whenever we're there, and you have this cathedral, this stadium, everyone's just, like passively watching him. I didn't like that interpretation because I thought it felt to me, and maybe again I'm reaching, but I felt like it's that we, the audience, were in the audience,
right,
guilting him or shaming him. And I personally, I didn't like that Ari was making us like participants in that process, when really I pity him. It's like he just assumes we were going to feel a certain way about this character. And I mean that just by how it's framed, essentially because we're looming over him in that same space. So it feels like he's made us contribute to that process. And I didn't feel like I was one of those audience members. I had hoped that he would find whatever he was looking for or whatever he needed, to get over this, and we don't really get that resolution. And so that's why I say I don't know what the overarching objective is we know how he feels, but are we supposed to feel bad for him? Are we supposed?
Well, yeah, and the crimes he was they were
accusing him of, or even
like, you didn't tell this one guy no enough. You're greedy, and I was like, it was a guy that was staged, so the whole thing was
right. So it's like, bizarre. So how much of it? Yeah, like what? And like the therapist, like I mentioned earlier, that writes down the word guilty, and that for whatever reason that resonated me for a little bit, because initially I thought, because he asked him the question, "Do you wish your mother was dead?" And he's afraid. Of course not. Of course not. He was like, "Do you feel guilty?" And he says no, but the therapist writes down the word guilty. And I saw it as him saying, like, he does feel guilty. So I'm writing it down. Like, he clearly feels guilty about this. So let's pin that for later. But upon deeper reflection, I feel like he was saying you're guilty. Like he was accusing him of being guilty. Because by the time we get to the end, that's all the movie's saying about him. Like, you're to blame for all of these things, because there's no one speaking on his behalf, not Beau especially. He's not speaking up for himself. So there's no one in this film that's coming to his aid, including himself. So that's what I don't know at the end. Like, are we supposed to feel bad for this guy, or is Ari asking us to shame him, that participate in the shaming of Beau at the end? Because we get no closure, and it ends with him not getting anything he wants. He's drowning in.
Yeah, but to your point,
in his own subconscious.
Yeah, but he doesn't really. That's the thing. To your point, though, he doesn't really even know what he wants. He wants to be free, but I don't think he himself knows what that looks like, because he's been so conditioned throughout his entire life and not equipped that the best hope he can have is if he were to go in the real world without his mom, he'd probably drown under the boat. I don't know. That's a leap. I'm trying to make sense of the boat.
It's just such a bleak. I guess it's just a nihilistic, like, bleak reality, and I'm fine with that. But if he's saying something about what that means, but
James, what did you make of all these connections? So you're looking at guilt, shame, control, sex, and this connection. All that leads back to his mom and the way she parented him. I mean, what do you make of the kind of the sexual element, especially?
These are the keywords I type into Pornhub every night. I'm just like, guilt, shame.
Don't look at porn. That's the moral of the story, everyone.
Don't release.
Control. I mean, again, I just keep going back to that. I don't even like Zizek, but I just keep going back to that documentary. I just think in these ways, the film is trying to demonstrate for us how, again, in a society, whatever the kind of ideology is going to shape the values, and that includes the sexual values, right? And I think that It's funny you mentioned Psycho earlier, but yeah, just this, because that's the thing, where Mrs. Bates is like, no, I tell you no, like these cheap erotic thrills, these sorts of things, right? And we get the sense that like when he's a child, I love that exploration in Psycho of Norman's bedroom that Lila undertakes. And she sees like a Rohika and all this sort of stuff and the sad bunny. And so we get the idea that when Norman is a child, the mother has explained to him, probably very similarly to the mother in Beau, that, sex is bad, masturbation, right, is bad. And we haven't even gotten to like the queer, whether or not, non-heteronormative, sexualities are possible in Psycho, just as that example. But yeah, I think the Venn diagram overlap between Mrs. Bates and Beau's mother are kind of there. And so I think the way I've understood ideology and sexuality kind of intertwine with one another is that the parents, right, tell the child what they can and cannot enjoy pleasurably, right? So that's the control part. And the shame and guilt, right, can happen in terms of like however the authority figure for the child, their guardian, responds to like when they start masturbating, for instance. Do they guide them like, okay, all right, look, like, here's a book. Like, read this. It's normal. It's healthy. This is what it goes through. Or does someone say to that child, like, you are, morally wrong for doing this. This is bad. This is Satan, or don't spill your seed, or before marriage, or any of these. What is the guardian saying to them? And whatever they start saying to them, that, right, the brain doesn't finish developing till 25. So that means this child who becomes an adult from age 25 onward is going to carry, it's in the synapses. It's like a record player, the synapses, right? These experiences become grooved in. So, and I think that's how ideology works at the same time, right? So I think that, and then if you don't, if the guardians are also not allowing the child to expose themselves to art, right, that is giving these representations that are healthier in terms of sex, then they're not ever going to know, right, what intimacy is, what, casual sex that's consensual is. Like, they're just not going to know any of that. So I think the film, again, I just almost just want to pull completely out and not read any of this literally, but to read the fact that the mother shows up when she does after the sex with Parker, that's just pure, we're in metaphor land, like that. This is what sex would be like with this guy, because he cannot be present for it. He's gonna have his mother in his head. So that's the control part. That's the shame part. That's the guilt part. That's the sexuality part. The myth part. You didn't say myth, but I started thinking of myth. That whole storytelling part, I realized listening to you all earlier. The middle section, right, in the woods, that's myth. Right? Like that. And that's, again, what we do in societies. We use storytelling to explain to our child, this is why we do what we do. And in your American dream, in our country's case, that's what Beau is hearing. Like, you will do this, you will do that. It's this. But then there's just this moment where the fantasy breaks, where it's like, no, actually, you don't fit it. Like, that's the moment where there's like a rupture. That I find really interesting, that it's almost like that is where I'll give Ari some intelligence. I almost get the impression that in that moment he is explaining to us that that's where the moment of like rupture and anxiety can happen for us, and maybe even the possibility of moving out of fantasy, the society's dominant stuff, and becoming your own. Like, no, the myths they're telling you are not. Don't do it. Like, don't follow that. But our poor Beau can't. He's so gone. So I don't know. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what you all have said. The biggest thing that really stuck out to me is Parker Posey. Well, there's a couple different just elements, and I'm trying to figure out how they fit into the puzzle. You talked earlier about the value systems of the parents being passed down to the children. You spent a lot of time talking about that. And I get the sense it's never clear that his mom is clearly passing on some form of trauma to him. And that includes, based on just the visual storytelling, she has some sort of weird sexual connection. It wasn't a sexual relationship, but you guys noticed the scene on the boat.
Yeah.
He was sleeping with
That
her.
proximity,
And she
yeah.
was in like sexy pajamas, like that's, it's
there. The subtext.
so it seems that you have to kind of read into it, but the thing is that she likely has had a failed relationship. Maybe maybe he is a giant dick in the attic that she murdered and left him in the attic. Maybe it's also implied that his dad is still alive by that one guy at the play. Maybe it's a guy who just moved on, broke her heart, and she didn't know what to do with the baby, so she latched on. So it feels like there's a little bit of that's been passed down. She's got some weird sexual stuff she's working out, doesn't know how to handle it, doubles down because she's already, for one reason or another, lost someone that she probably cared about, seemingly Beau's dad. So she's overprotective and overcompensating on Beau. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff you have to kind of project and read between the lines on. And I don't like that I have to do that. But there's something there. There's a lot of subtext with the mom having some sort of attraction to Beau.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what to make of that 100%. The other thing is just more as an yes and the psychological conditioning to Beau that you guys have talked about, the Parker Posey character. I noticed that whenever he first saw her on the stream, the internet, when he turned on, opened the computer, he vomited. And probably for a variety of reasons, but that's the thing. It's that sexual repression. He doesn't know how to process feelings of attraction. He's probably got a lot of guilt. He's got that photo he's carried around because he's literally been saving. Like, this woman is supposed to be his savior, but also potentially the Grim Reaper at the same time.
She's like, why did you wait?
Right? Yeah.
I love her so much.
She looks so good too. I was like,
oh yeah,
I don't know. She aged very well.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing. But I also saw Beau's mom, she was like, I will be everything for you.
Yes.
Because you can have nothing else. If that's what you need, you need someone to talk to you or be a sexual surrogate of sorts. Maybe not going all the way, but you know what I mean? But even if using that kind of language around him, I know you're developing feelings and what have you. And you know what I mean? So she's perverting, you know what I mean? Like, in that line, that weird middle ground between that, and that's why everything for him is so,
Well, the world's a scary place. I will protect you from all of them by being all the things that you need. My version of the things you think you need.
You think you need, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot there. I think you guys said it a lot better than me, frankly, but I think we are about out of time. Otherwise, we'll, have talked just the length of this movie on the podcast. All that said, well, guys, I'm going to wrap us up. Is there anything else you would like to say about Beau Is Afraid before we close out today's conversation? Anything random we missed?
Oh, the stabby naked man. That's funny.
Yeah, the birthday stabber.
In the hand. Oh,
Yes.
That was unsettling.
so good.
Very
that part's
unsettling.
all good.
Yeah.
I frankly liked it when Jeeves lit himself up with a machine gun. After it was just, again, a little bit of physical humor,
Yeah.
And then somehow was still alive to stab the giant dick monster later. I don't know.
Yes, but then the giant dick monster stabs back because it cares about Beau and it wants to protect him.
Beau's got a twin brother. We even mentioned apparently Beau's. I have no idea what the hell to make of that.
And that wasn't portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix. That surprised me that his older twin brother in the attic was not Joaquin Phoenix.
It's not him? Oh, okay.
No, it's somebody who looks a lot like
I assumed
him.
it was.
Me too, yeah. Weird.
Don't know what to make of that. Just maybe on the second viewing if I ever bring myself to revisit it. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for talking about this extremely impressive, and not impressive in a good way, but as in it made a strong impression on us enough that we talk about it. Beau Is Afraid. James Cooper, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to sit down and talk with us for a couple of hours. Where can people follow you and all the great things you're doing in the community and online?
They can on Instagram at JamesBoroKC, and that's 4 spelled out like the preposition. And then same on Facebook. And if you ever need any official city council business, Ward2 at okc.gov.
All right. Daniel Beaukemper?
You can find me here on the cinematropolis.com. Keep an eye out for an Ari Aster piece, a short retrospective.
It'll be live by the time people are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep an eye out for that. But also more recently, just as recently, flickattack.com. I have a review of Evil Dead Rise and Beau Is Afraid there as well. So check them out. Also, my review of Ennisman, which was when you were talking about James Memoria. Is that the film? Ennisman, I haven't seen Memoria, so I don't have an opinion on it fully, but I'm going to go see it. But what you described started to remind me of Ennisman quite a bit. Really enjoyed it. So check out that review as well.
Yeah. Excellent. LaRon Chapman?
You can follow me on Facebook under my name, LaRon Chapman, or if you want to follow my reviews on Letterboxd, I don't know why you would, but if you did, it's under black_Cinna_man.
LaRon, they'd follow you because you have great, thoughtful things
humble,
about.
Just feeding for attention.
You need the followers. It's okay. Your reviews are great. I love your Letterboxd reviews. You can follow all the things we're doing at the Cinematropolis over at thecinematropolis.com, including more of these podcasts. If this is the first one you're tuning in for, we recently did a couple of double headers. We did a Dungeons and Dragons versus Super Mario Brothers double header, and we also most recently did a Renfield and Evil Dead Rise double header. So you can check those out, cinematropolis.com. or under the Cinematic Schematic, wherever your podcasts are found. You can also follow me tweeting about a lot of the movies I see. Also the television shows. I'm watching mostly Yellow Jackets or Succession right now.
What about Barry?
And Barry. Okay. Yeah, I haven't tweeted about Barry yet, though. But Barry. Oklahoma's own Bill Hader. Damn, that guy can direct.
Also in Beau Is Afraid. Very briefly. Completely forgot about that.
Holy cow. What a cameo.
Does not show his face, but he is in it.
No, he kind of shows his face.
You see you see his profile a little bit, but yeah.
That was great. That was a great moment. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you again next time.